quiet, I decided it was time to call the meeting to order. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the March 3rd, 2008 meeting of the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority Redevelopment Agency meeting. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Steve Glickman.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Brzezinski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mike Wasserman.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. All right, tonight we're going to have a very special treat. Every meeting we have a future leader lead the Pledge of Allegiance. And this time we're going to have a group of young women called the Robo-Chicks. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, tell you a little bit about them, and then have each one come up and stand here in front of me. Tonight's future leaders are members of the Robo-Chicks, an all-girl Lego robotics team who recently competed in the regional qualifying tournament in Hillsborough, taking first place in the robot design category and second place overall. In that competition, this is really cool, they had to maneuver their robots to put a solar panel on top of a toy house. Members of the Robo-Chicks include, and then I'll have them each come up one by one. The first one I don't believe is here, Mary Benson. She was unable to make it this evening. Maya Sweedler, come on up. After her, Nadine Swinburne. Nadine. Tanya Takahashi. These three young women are sixth graders at Fisher Middle School. Emma Montrose, a seventh grader at Rolling Hills Middle School. Emily Kessler, a sixth grader at Girls Middle School in Mountain View. Now, okay, we got to get ready for our photo ops here. All of the girls are exceptional students achieving GPAs ranging from 3.6 to 4.0 and are active volunteers in the community. Some of their special projects have included traveling to indigenous communities to provide medical and education services, supporting the Jewish Federation of Silicon Valley, and assisting local community choirs. The girls also have diverse interests, including writing video game reviews, playing the saxophone and lacrosse, performing Chinese ballet at community theaters, and earning a black belt in Taekwondo. Okay. All right. Now, if you would all join us in pledging the flag, I will have these young women lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, and let's give them a hand. Now I'm going to ask you to start down here and shake the hands of each of our council people, beginning with Councilmember Glickman. Very impressive. Thank you. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good job. Mr. Korb, you're not going to be as interesting as the Robo-Chicks, but do we have a closed session report?
We do, and I am pleased to report that council did not meet in closed session tonight, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, boards, commission, committee appointment. And we have Transportation and Parking Commission with one vacancy. Madam Clerk.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, the council will be appointing an applicant to the Transportation and Parking Commission. You held interviews on 2/19/08, and the applicant is Eric Wilhelmsen. So I'd like to give a show of hands for everybody who's in favor of Eric Wilhelmsen for the Transportation and Parking Commission? And no? Okay, thank you. It was 4 and 1 abstained. So,
Thank you.
you know? Okay, 4 to 1 with 1 no. Thank you. There was no applications to rent advisory, personnel, or art selection panel. So if you'd like, I could re-advertise for those positions.
If you would, please, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now, before we begin, we'll go on with the agenda items, I will ask everyone who intends to speak this evening to fill out one of these cards and to hand it to the clerk over here, please. All right, first thing on the agenda, consent items, which will be acted upon by a single motion. Before the Town Council Redevelopment Agency acts on the consent agenda, any member of the public or Town Council agency may request that any item be removed from the consent calendar. Consent items will be heard after other business, and I will tell you already that agenda items 2 and 4 have been pulled by Citizen Ray. Does any member of the council wish to pull any other item? Seeing no one, does any member of the public wish to pull any other item? All right, seeing no one else, then items 2 and 4 will be heard after other business. Do I hear a motion on the remainder of the calendar?
So moved. Second?
It's been moved by Mr. Brzezinski, seconded by Mr. Glickman, that we adopt the consent calendar now consisting of items 1 and 3. Discussion, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, passes unanimously. Verbal communications. At this point on our agenda, you can have up to 3 minutes, may be allotted to each speaker to address matters that are not on tonight's agenda, And I have a card from Citizen Ray. If anybody else wants to speak on this, please give me a card. Citizen Ray.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Always a pleasure to attend one of your meetings, okay? First off, I would like to present to McNutt, Wasserman, and Brzezinski a copy of the Metro News of a week or so ago, okay? And the story was entitled Skate Park Sabotage, with a question mark, okay? So for you three who may be in the dark about the issues involved, I'm submitting this for your perusal, okay? So please be advised, you need to take a look at it, because there was a crime committed that was freely admitted to by the town clerk, administrative clerk. And she begs the question by saying she didn't know any better. Excuse me, since when is ignorance of the law an excuse? Since when? I mean, and shyster attorneys don't decide that issue. The courts decide it, not shyster attorneys. So I'll submit this for the three. Oops. Next, I filed a public records request with the city attorney for information on skateboard accidents for the past 3 years in Los Gatos. I got some, okay? 3 in 2007. I'm going to read the police report of one of the most egregious. It says here, juvenile stated that he was riding a skateboard downhill on Lurch Drive. He began to get speed wobbles as he descended the hill. One of the wheels on a skateboard hit a small rock, throwing him forward and off of the skateboard. Fire personnel informed me that juvenile had a broken clavicle and a broken left wrist. He also had an abrasion to his left wrist and right lower leg. Juvenile was wearing a helmet at the time of the accident. There were no irregularities in the roadway where the juvenile crashed. Juvenile was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital. Here's a perfect example of what you three people have relegated the youth of Los Gatos who use skateboards to the mean streets of Los Gatos, where most everybody speeds, most everybody runs, not most, considerable number run the red lights, and so forth. And you have decided not to spend the money that should be spelled out for these kids.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I don't have cards from anyone else, so I will now close the verbal communications portion of our agenda, and we will go on to public hearings. Now, at public hearings, the applicants or the appellants or their representatives may be allotted up to a total of 10 minutes maximum for opening statements. Members of the public may be allotted up to 3 minutes, and applicants or appellants may, or the representatives will then have up to 5 minutes for closing statements. This evening, agenda item 5, and again, if you're going to speak on it, please submit a card. The following: consider an appeal of a Planning Commission decision approving the demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new residence on property zoned R120 APN 532-05025, architecture and site application S07182, property location 16330 Englewood Avenue, property owner applicant C. Patrick Moonerlin, appellants Gil Perez, Ned Finkel, Kelly Coffey, and Yvette Bonnet. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do, Madam Mayor, members of the council, and there is a desk item on this particular item before you. On December 12th of 2007, and then again on January 9th of 2008, the Planning Commission considered an appeal of the Development Review Committee's decision to approve the demolition of the residence, garage, and guest house on the site and to construct a new two-story residence and garage. The appeal focused on a privacy issue and provision of landscape screening for two residences on Shannon Road that are perpendicular to and situated two lots over from the applicant's property. The Commission continued the matter from December 12th to January 9 to allow the neighbors and applicant additional time to try to reach an agreement on appropriate landscaping to address the privacy concern of the two neighbors on Shannon and the view preservation concern of the adjacent neighbor on Englewood Avenue. The Commission asked the applicant to report back on what was discussed and the outcome of any meetings. The applicant and neighbors met on December 16th and looked at the project site from different neighboring properties. Based on that discussion, the applicant developed a revised screening plan. The intent was to screen the rear of the house to provide the desired privacy from the Perez and Finkel residences and to preserve the view of the hills from the Costacia property. While the applicants have indicated that the screening plan appears to be the best option given the different perspectives and goals of everyone involved, they have not agreed to the current plan as a final resolution to the privacy issue. The story poles on the site were revised to reflect a roof line change that was agreed upon between staff, the applicant, and the neighbors on Englewood Avenue at the DRC meeting in October. At the January 9 meeting, the Commission determined that the applicant had followed the direction provided at the previous meeting and denied the appeal and upheld the approval of the architecture and site approval. 4 neighbors appealed the Planning Commission's decision. Staff and the applicant have had numerous discussions and communications with the appellants, and until shortly before the January 9, 2008 Commission meeting, the focus and goal of the discussions were to develop an adequate landscape screening plan to address privacy concerns while not eliminating neighbors' views. The desk item that is included also includes a letter from one of the appellants withdrawing their appeal. It is recommended that the council deny the appeal, uphold the Planning Commission's decision approving architecture and site application S-07-182. That concludes staff's report.
Questions of staff? All right, now, let me explain that anyone, the appellant or anyone who wants to speak on this should have submitted a card. This is Agenda Item 5, and I'm saying that because I don't have cards from anyone who wishes to speak until just now. I got cards. All right, now, there are several appellants on this case, and so what you need to do is you have a total of 10 minutes for the appellants. And you may have, share the time, have one person speak. That's up to you. But I note that we have Mr. Perez and Mr. Finkel. Mr. Wiles isn't an appellant, is he? All right. So if Mr. Perez and Mr. Finkel want to come forward and share your time or have one person speak. Come up here and identify yourself for the camera and the record, please.
My name is Gil Perez. I live on 16590 Shannon. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present my case in front of you. I would also want to thank all of the Los Gatos residents, over 20 who were involved in this appeal and signed a petition, which is included in probably the packet you received. In particular, I also want to thank the Planning Commission members for their time and effort, and also Mayor Barbara Spector for visiting the site earlier today, which I think gives everybody a first-hand view of the issues at hand. Kind of jump into the core of the matter is I also think that one of the issues that was missing in this entire issue at hand is the lack of process. In particular, I believe that if we had a proper process in place, we would not be here today. Specifically, I'm referring to the scope and the impact of influence of a new building that it has on the surrounding and who is and who should be notified. Unfortunately, both Ned and myself, who were notified, so to speak, of the new construction when the story poles went up, we did not get any notification from the town, and we were not aware that anything was happening. Additionally, an adjacent house, Mr. Johnson on 16335 La Chiquita, which is actually an adjacent house on the rear end, was not aware of the new building either, and was also made aware of it only when the story poles were erected. By excluding neighbors that are impacted by new construction from the initial planning and the process, basically, thus we are creating the conflict that we're all seeing right now. The solution, which does not address, the solution that was found, which does not address the concerns of the nearby by residents, really paves the way for a confrontation. And the reason for that is that residents are really forced to appeal a decision because something has been approved. They haven't had any chance to speak their opinion on the matter, and the only way they can impact the process is by appeal. Furthermore, I want to quote a couple of individuals. It was stated earlier we had Miss Yvette Bonnet, which was part of our appeal and reversed her appeal. In the letter that you have in front of you, she writes, "I remain concerned over the Planning Committee handling of this and other previous construction projects in my neighborhood. I do not believe that they are consistently enforcing or following the town guidelines or new constructions. Patrick, as well as all of the property owners' previous projects have been approved by the Planning Committee, should not be punished for the Planning Committee failure to correctly interpret and enforce town code for new constructions. I strongly urge the committee to review the process and the guidelines for new constructions and ensure that going forward, the committee strictly follows those guidelines for the town of Los Gatos. Thus, the project and the process is flawed. Yes, she believes that the builder/contractor should not be punished. Commissioner Bourgeois from the Planning Commission also reiterates the same thing. That's from the minutes of January 9th. I restate my position from the last meeting, basically that I really haven't changed where I stand on this. I share my concerns about the design. I'm concerned that the largest house on the street didn't automatically get kicked to us in the first place. Those are issues I have concerns with, but at the same time, I think that the applicant has done everything that has been asked of them. So basically, again, we have a process and a project that is flawed, yet people do not want to punish the builder/contractor, and because of that, they decide to move forward. So my questions to you, town councilors, first of all, do two wrongs make it right? You know, if we do agree that a mistake has been made, should we make that a permanent fixture in our neighborhood? And the second thing is, which is another aspect of it, is the fact that by conceptually not punishing the contractor, you're actually punishing the other. It's a zero-sum game, and by not punishing Patrick, you take away rights or privileges from other neighbors which have been in the neighborhoods and have been living in Los Gatos for tens of years. Last but not least, I would like to end with the following thoughts. We have 20 people who have signed our petition. Patrick has been extremely active in trying to persuade them to change their opinion. He did succeed with two of them, Miss Bonnet and Miss Johnston. Yet 18 others did not change their mind. Furthermore, several neighborhoods, including adjacent ones, who through the process learned of their rights, changed their minds and decided to oppose the new structure, and are requesting it to be reduced in size and mass. Again, out of Commissioner Kane's January 9th minute, I certainly don't hold any citizen accountable for not knowing the fine prints of what the Planning Commission is supposed to know. It is encouraging that it was discovered at some point. As such, I urge the Council to accept our appeal and request the developer-owner to redesign the structure and to meet the residential development standard by significantly reducing the scale and mass of the second story of the new building.
Thank you. Do we have any time left? All right, we have 3 minutes. I note that I think Mr. Coffey, or we have a total of 10 minutes. And we have Mr. Coffey, Mr. Perez, who's already spoken, and Mr. Finkel, so you have 3 minutes left.
Okay. My name is Ned Finkel. I live at 16608 Shannon Road. I want to also thank the Town Council for taking time to hear the issues and be a part of the deliberative process that keeps Los Gatos a great place to live. My background, I lived in the current property now for 14 years. I lived nearby growing up for over 35 years in the town, and I knew the people who lived in the property that I bought. Also knew the neighbor, Dr. McCullough, who maybe you guys know here. So I've been familiar with the property and the immediate neighborhood for many years, this cluster of 10 to 15 homes, which I call the immediate neighborhood. While the proposed structure meets the technical requirements for the lot of this size, the scale and the mass do not match the character of the immediate neighborhood. Therein lies the problem and the challenge. Bottom line is this house is about 3.5 times the original house, the original main structure of the property. And that's not my complaint, actually, the size of the property. The problem is half of the new size, 2,300 square feet or some number like that, is up in the air. And if you walk around that area, get out of your car, walk around to the backyards of these properties, and some of you have, and I'm not sure if Diane did it or Barbara. Diane, thank you. Anybody who's come by, the commissioners that came by and visited the backyards got an idea of what happens in the neighborhoods and homes where they've been remodeled or transitioned, as they use in some of the terminology, to face that view and that property. So now we have literally 2,300 or 2,350 square feet up in the air in that view plane. So Its introduction is a shock to the character of the neighborhood, in my opinion. The process to notify the people in this immediate area, I think, was suboptimal. For that much square footage, that much scale up in the air, I think a broader group of people needed to be brought into the process. So what I want to do is just kind of wrap up fairly quickly and say we got put into a situation of bartering over views, bartering over landscape issues, and kind of a confusing process. And we then came to the conclusion something's wrong with the process. And in fact, the commissioner process, the planning commissioners, pointed us to the wording and that was well written. So I think we need to go back to that wording and decide, should that stay in our documents? And should we have a process to reinforce that? Or take it out and actually we really become a lot more like San Jose? I like the words. I like what they said. So thank you for the time you put into it and hearing our contentions.
Any time left for the appellants? All right, 1 minute.
Kelly Coffey. I'm the south neighbor of the proposed new building. I just want to reiterate what Mr. Perez and Mr. Finkel already said. I think if we had been more inclusive of all the different neighbors in the area, we probably would have come to already an agreement on what needed to happen. I felt that during the DRC meetings, it was just this house meets the technical specs, and there was no discussion about the impact on the other neighbors. I have a major privacy issue. And so I think because the data that was generated out of the DRC was kind of flawed because it was very narrowed in focus, I think the Planning Commission kind of erred in their decision to approve this.
All right, thank you. Does anybody on the council have a question for any of the appellants? Mr. Brzezinski.
For Mr. Finkel?
Yes.
Quick clarification, Mr. Finkel. Thank you for being here tonight.
Sure.
You stated that members of the Planning Commission pointed you in the direction of the issues. Could you explain that?
Sure. Well, in your documents on the website, it actually outlines what the guidelines are, and it talks, and it's in the packet that we send, and in the petition that we had signed, it talks about scale and mass and character in the neighborhood, in addition to the technical requirements of square footage and all that. And I think in this case, when you look at the nature of those lots, they're thin half-acre lots, it matters a lot how you put the mass and you spread it out on the lot. And if you're a three-quarter-acre lot, like a couple doors down, you can spread out, 3-car garage and a house, and it looks great. If you take a thin half-acre lot and prop up a high property, it makes a big difference. And that's why they put those words in there. It makes sense, scale and mass.
Thank you.
Mr. Wasserman for Mr. Finkel.
Also for Mr. Finkel, yes. Thank you. A couple of questions for you, Mr. Finkel. You brought up the idea of you talked about privacy and the issues that were addressed. As I go through the various meetings and the minutes, et cetera, it seemed that it was privacy and screening and loss of view of the sky, things like that.
Correct.
And then it seemed to take a turn and go to mass and scale. And I was wondering, two-part question. One, why did the opposition seem to change from loss of view, privacy, screening, et cetera, to mass and scale? And secondly, after you go through a FAR and a height and a setback and a consulting architect and a DRC, et cetera, I guess I'm confused. You talk about mass and scale, and for me that's the subjective unknown. It's not a measurable, quantifiable number.
Yeah.
Okay? So what is too massive to one person might not be too massive to another. So my two questions for you is, why did the opposition change from its focus on one concern to this new focus?
Yeah.
And secondly, I guess I'm asking, where do you draw the line on mass and scale after it's gone through planning and DRC and the consulting architect?
Well, I think those are great questions. And when we got into the process early on, note that I was brought into it when the storyboard polls went up. So we were informed of an approved project, and we were trying to get happy with the product by covering up with landscaping. That was the part that I got involved in, which is probably September, October. Mr. Perez also, and others. So that's when I came into it. And so I think when we start out talking about this at the time, it was views and privacy that were really the issues, and we were trying to get happy with it. Most of us are not against people building, and we're not against people, taking advantage of the properties that they've bought. So we didn't want to be in contention with this property. Now, I think you get to a certain point where you can't put landscaping that causes another guy's problem, and you're trying to use the term put lipstick on a pig. You can't cover it up, and you get to what's wrong with it. Now, eloquently, in the meetings that we had, Commissioner Kane laid out the arguments as to why this thing did have a problem from a scale and a mass standpoint. And it really comes down to, if you stand in the backyard and you look up at the property, it dwarfs the view. It knocks out a whole mountain. It's a big property. And I wish it was, had a field of trees that were around it that were already there, so you could slide it in and nobody had a big problem. Because some of the properties have that element. When they move in, they don't create a big disruption. The other neighbors aren't, they don't have a new challenge in front of them. It was blocked from their view to begin with. In this case, it's a flat plain, and everybody was looking out at the mountains, and now they've got a large structure up in their view. So the argument changed because we learned more about what the process enabled us to talk about, and we got visibility to the well-written documents that the town had put in place. And I think the process doesn't really enable, if the more neighbors had been brought in and they looked through those documents, they would have talked about that in the beginning. And I think to the judgment call, the challenge is for the town to allow a quality building to go on throughout the town, and I'm a proponent of that. I did a large remodel on my place, which Diane got to see. But to put enough pressure on people that they're considerate of the neighbors and the neighborhood when they go in and put those in. And that's a big part of Los Gatos, is neighborhoods and the friendliness of it. You don't just, put I'll use a bad term, a monster house in the middle of a flat plain of smaller homes. And that's the struggle, and it's a judgment call.
Thank you.
Further questions? Yes, Ms. McNutt.
This question is for Mr. Perez. Could you comment for me on your specific thoughts regarding the landscape component that was approved by the Planning Commission as a mitigation?
The two, I think, challenges that we had with the landscape was really when and how long will the landscape, come into effect. We're talking about trees that are, or bushes, shrubs that are of 6 to 9 feet. We're talking about a house that is close to 29 feet, and then you have the challenge of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years till those bushes or landscape will actually mature and actually give you a decent separation from the house. So one of the challenges that we had was, we tried to come in and say, let's figure out a way to do some kind of a landscape, but we fell on the details of when will that have an impact, and if it's only 5 or 6 years away, what will happen in 5 years? I mean, who knows if in 5 years, who's going to be in that building or that house, and what will happen to those bushes? A storm can come in, make them go away. So, I mean, that was our challenge of putting the landscape in place.
May I follow up with that?
Certainly.
Putting aside that concern, do you feel that landscaping at full growth as proposed would offer you some relief as to what you're concerned about in terms of what you see outside your back door there?
I think, to be realistic, I think that it would be, a significant compromise, but I think that if high enough and tall enough branches and trees would be in place, I think that, that would be something that we would be willing to live with. Definitely, we're not against, and I'm not against, other people building, second stories. The intent is not to prevent somebody, and we're not asking the house to not have a second story. We're asking it to be, reduced in size, and we're asking for the process in which will be inclusive of people, as opposed to, getting a house situated in front of you and saying, okay, this is the plan. You can really only comment on the trimming of the windows. And, that's not, an inclusive and that's not how I think neighbors should act to each other.
Mr. Glickman, and who did you want to direct your question?
Well, we'll start with Mr. Perez because he's standing there. But some of the questions I ask, I think, could equally be directed to all of the people who spoke, Mr. Perez, Mr. Finkel, and Mr. Coffey. In your appeal, you had said neighbors' opposition grew over time since no one was aware of the ability to petition a redesign of the structure. Mr. Perez, I understand that you represented or you worked with Mr. Kent Westerberg, an attorney. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And let me say that I did visit the property and the project. And let me also mention that in the past I have worked with Mr. Westerberg, and I have a great deal of respect for him as a competent land use attorney. When he spoke to the Planning Commission in January, he said, well, the only issues before us are screening and landscaping. Mr. Perez, as I said, I believe that you had very competent counsel, and so when you said that no one was aware of the ability to petition, and I know that you attended the DRC meetings, so...
I did not attend the DRC.
You did not? Okay.
I did not attend the DRC.
Which is why I said that some of my remarks are going to be directed at some of the other... I believe your wife attended, is that correct?
No.
No.
DRC are the meetings, the DRC meetings are the planning.
Oh, DRC meeting.
She was there with Mr. Westerberg.
Right, okay. I'm just trying to understand, or have you confirmed that you were not made aware of the...
Sorry, DRC meetings are meetings that happened before the Planning Commission, right? Well, neither me or my wife were present.
Okay, then I would direct the same question to Mr. Coffey and Mr. Finkel. And I see Mr.
So I wasn't at those either.
Okay.
We weren't given notice. We weren't given notice.
Okay.
Let's have one person speak at a time, and Mr. Glickman, let's have your question directed to one of these people.
I think that's a wonderful idea. Thank you very much. What I'm trying to understand is when you say that no one was aware of the ability to petition a redesign of the structure, I just want to understand whether at any time your attorney informed you had that right.
No. When I again, the flow of the situation was we were informed. I came down to the town when we saw the storyboards. I travel a lot. It took me about a week and a half, 2 weeks to come down to the town. And when I actually arrived at the town on a Friday, it was after it was approved. And from that point on, I met with Suzanne Davis, who's a planning from the town planning. And the information that I was provided is this has been approved. Really, there's, it's according to spec, the technicalities, the technical specs have been, approved. And really what you have the ability is within 10 days either to appeal it or, to come to some kind of an agreement with Patrick. We engaged in a discussion. And from that point, it kind of rolled forward. At no point till Mr. Kane came up and talked about, Commissioner Kane, and then the chairman of the Planning Commission, which I forgot her name, sorry, started talking and highlighting the situation with the Los Gatos planning standard guidelines, development guidelines, where we made aware of the fact that, there's a scale of mass, there is proportions, there is, guidelines that go beyond the technical elements of, square footage, et cetera.
Okay, thank you very much. A follow-up question, if I may.
Which speaker?
This is for Mr. Perez.
Mr. Perez, yes.
And it speaks directly to the issue that you just raised. As I read the history of the project, the staff report, the transcripts of the 2 Planning Commission hearings, it did appear to me that the focus, in fact, the only concern that was raised by you, the appellant, and your co-appellants, concerned views and landscaping. That was the focus, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, at one point in the testimony, your attorney emphasized that fact, that these are the only issues. Then, and recently, or just a few moments ago, you had said that when you heard one of the planning commissioners, I think you identified Mr. Kane, raise other issues, that you then said, oh, yes, we're concerned about that, too. I want to give you a fair opportunity to address a concern that I have, and I think perhaps some of the other council members may be thinking about, in that you raised some concerns about a project, you saw the story polls, you were involved in the process, and the concerns that you raised concerned views and screening and landscaping. It appears from what you said that when a commissioner raised concerns about another issue, which was really not related to that, you then discovered, and that's my word, that you were concerned about that too.
I would.
Let me finish the question, because I want you to respond to this, because it's a concern of mine. We, in this council, have spent a very, very great deal of time dealing with many, many land use issues similar to this. And, you know, sometimes people come forward and raise issues that we wonder whether they're the key issues or whether they think that they will be persuasive to achieve an end. So I guess I'm a bit concerned when you say, well, I'm opposed to the project, I want to appeal it, I want the council to deny it, and you say, but it's not based on what I originally said, but when I heard that there was some concern on the, for example, the Planning Commission about this, then I want to add that to the mix. And if that's a misperception, I want to give you this opportunity to correct it.
I think that what happened was, again, when this occurred, initially, as I explained earlier, we were trying to address the symptoms, because the symptoms, which was, you know, trying to cover up, as I think Ned also explained, which was, you know, we were trying to figure out a way to not necessarily deal with the root of the problem, but put some kind of a cover around it. And because, quite honestly and frankly, we thought this was the best that we could do. If we were aware of the fact that we could ask for a redesign. Now, we're not jumping and asking, and this is not kind of, you know, let's figure out another way to throw another wrench in this and figure out another way to cause some more, you know, harm or more difficult time for somebody else. This is, you know, and I want to reassure you that that's, you know, there's no intent on anybody, at least from my perspective on our side, to do anything of that sort. What we are trying to do is we were trying to address our concerns, and our concerns, by definition, from the beginning, we were not able to express them because it was our interpretation that a redesign was, you know, not even an option. You know, it has been approved. The only thing that you could do is basically now talk about, again, touch-ups here or there. We were not talking about any kind of redesign of the house. The only thing that we were talking about, you know, again, was doing some kind of a landscaping. And the reason for that was, again, our understanding, our interpretation that that was the scope of the game. And when that happened, when that changed, we naturally went to the root of the problem, which was, again, the redesign of the house, which at that point will eliminate or prevent the need also to doing, you know, landscaping issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Any other questions of the appellant? Mr. Brzezinski.
Yes, this is Mr. Perez. Mr. Perez, I just need a quick clarification.
Sure.
In your last comment, you indicated that, and this is kind of a follow-on to Councilman Gluckman's comments, that it was not until Plan Commissioner Kane and
yeah, when Chair Kane and
Chair Telesfor pointed you to different items in the residential design standards.
That's
that
correct.
you looked at these. And did this occur during the commission meeting?
Yeah, that occurred during the commission meeting,
That's
which I
all.
was not present. I saw that over, your broadcast, and naturally after that, we decided that we would bring that to bear.
And then subsequent to that, you researched the documents.
Correct.
Thank you.
Council, other questions? All right, thank you. Just to let you all know where we're going with this, we will now have speakers, including the applicant, each of whom has 3 minutes. When they are finished, the appellants as a group will have a total of 5 minutes to respond. Because this is an appeal. They have it there as speakers.
I thought I had 10 minutes. It says the applicants and appellants and the representatives may be allotted up to a total of 10 minutes maximum for opening statements.
All right, hold on just a minute. I have 3 minutes, but we won't. Tell you what, instead of dealing with it by waiting for Ori, we'll just go with 5 minutes.
Okay.
And before we do that, I have met with the applicant, and I have driven by the properties and the street.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if I could then declare as well that I too have been on the properties, both the properties on Shannon Road and the properties on Inglewood, and have met with the applicant and have visited those properties at least 2 times, including taking the view from the driveway and gated area of the Shannon Road properties, and then walking the property on Inglewood.
All right.
Do you want to start?
Does everyone want to do their disclosure now?
I
Just
met
make
you
that-
all.
Thank you. And I also met with the applicant. I also visited the project site, and I talked my way into the backyards of the Finkel home and the Perez home on Shannon Road today.
And then it's on closing.
I also visited with the applicant, and I visited the site twice.
All right, very good. Well, guess what? You just got another 5 minutes, so you have 10 minutes.
Great.
And if you give us your name, please.
Hopefully I won't need it all.
All right, give us your name, please.
My name is Patrick Monolan. I live at 228 Bella Vista Avenue. I'm the applicant and the property owner at 16330 Inglewood Avenue. I want to start out tonight saying that I believe that I've done everything that I've been asked to do by both the town and my neighbors to ensure that this house meets the town's residential development guidelines. Unfortunately, over the course of these appeals of my project, the appellants have changed their objection to my project. I want to touch on a couple things that the appellants mentioned while they were up here. One was that there was a lack of process. I would say that there was the same process that any new home going through the town would have gone through. Actually, more. We've had 2 DRC meetings, we've had 2 planning commission meetings, and now we're at the town council. I think there's been more than enough process in this. They also touched upon the idea of not wanting to punish the developer. Well, the reason being the commission spoke to that was because they didn't want to change the rules in the middle of the game for me. I followed the process. They felt that I did everything that I was asked to do. The appellants got up here and they requested that this stuff be reviewed. Well, I don't mind it being reviewed, but don't review it in the middle of my process. The appellants also mentioned that I tried to change people's minds, and that I was successful in changing 2 people's minds. I took the advice from Councilman Glickman to go and talk to my neighbors, talk to the people who had signed the petition, and it was pretty interesting. When they heard my side of the story, there was no reason to change their minds. I went to them and gave them honest opinions. I handed Suzanne Davis's card to every single one of them and said, you've heard my side of the story, you've heard their side of the story, call Suzanne and find the real story. It was interesting to find that my adjacent neighbor behind me, who had signed the petition, has retracted it and said that she'd like her name off. She didn't even know that the appeal had gone to the town council and that her name on that initial petition was a basis to a continued appeal to town council. One of the appellants talked about the depth of the lot. I was originally asked to push the house back on I originally designed the house to be further back in the lot, and the town's consulting architect told me to move it forward. A neighbor from across the street asked me to push it back. My two adjacent neighbors told me to move it forward because they didn't want it. Mr. Coffey in particular, I set the house on the lot for his concern. They're asking me to redesign the second story. If I take a bedroom out of there and put it downstairs, it's going to push the house back. So I'm kind of pigeonholed onto my lot, I feel, at this point. The appellants claim, they had a petition with 20 signatures. I talked to some of those people, and like I said before, they were unaware that their signature continued on as a basis to an appeal to town council. Actually, only 4, maybe 5 people were actually on that petition, were on my block. I talked to people who were acquaintances of the appellants and wanted to support them, and other people wanted their name off it completely. As far as notification, I admit that Mr. Finkel and the two appellants on Shannon Road were not notified because they were out of the zone. But the story polls were up for 28 days prior to them actually coming in and asking the town what was going on. So I think they had plenty of advance notice. And like I said, there were 2 DRC meetings that if they had come in a timely manner, they could have been a part of. So let me get back to my prepared statement. I want to remind everyone, in order to overturn the Planning Commission's decision, the Town Council must find one of the following. I'm sure you all understand this and are aware of this, but I want to just make it clear for everyone that there was an error or abuse of discretion on the part of the Planning Commission, that new information was submitted to the Council during the appeal process that was not readily available for submission to the Commission, or an issue or policy for the Commission was that the Commission did not have discretion to modify or address, but which was vested for the council for modification or decision. From the comments that the appellants made, I don't think they met any of those standards. We need to go back and take a look at what the Planning Commission reviewed and what kind of evidence was put before the Planning Commission for them to come to their decision, and was that substantial enough evidence for them to support the decision that they came to. And I came up with 8 things that were presented to the Commission that supported their decision. The first one is the town's architectural consultant report, which stated the design of the house was very well done in terms of architectural design and details, and he compared it to other 2-story homes on the street. Then he had the second follow-up report, where he stated that moving the garage made a significant improvement to the design. There was the minutes and the approval of the DRC, where 3 neighbors were in attendance, expressed their concerns. I made changes to the plans, and they approved the design along with the DRC. The DRC stated in here that it meets the town's development standards. The two staff reports for the 2 Planning Commission meetings that both recommended the project be approved and the appeal to be denied. The development drawings that was given to each Planning Commission, where they had a chance to review the drawings and compare it to their interpretation of the development guidelines. A letter of support from a neighbor across the street. Here. Public testimony asking that landscape screening be put in place. And finally, the landscape screening plan that we all worked on together to come up with in a joint, that we were requested by the Planning Commission to work together. That's what the continuance was about. The matter was continued for us to work together as neighbors, and that's what I thought we were doing over that month. Unfortunately, the appellants took that time to create a petition and change their objection. I feel that I've done everything that I've been asked for, and I don't think that they've presented anything here to meet one of the 3 criteria. In support of their side, the only things that they presented was public testimony from 2 of the appellants and a petition signed by 20 people. Some of the people lived miles away up on Hollywood Avenue on Lilac behind Whole Foods, nowhere near the project. And the statement on the petition was pretty innocuous. It said, "The below undersigned urged the Planning Commission to review the decision to approve the proposed construction on 16330 Inglewood Avenue and ensure it conforms to the town of Los Gatos residential development standards." Well, who wouldn't sign that? It's not saying that we believe it doesn't meet it. It doesn't say that it doesn't, absolutely does not meet the development guidelines. That's a pretty innocuous standard, and if someone came to my porch, I would probably sign it too, because who wouldn't want the Planning Commission to re-review a project? Finally, in their appeal, they had a point-by-point appeal. I don't want to go through it all, but I'll touch upon a couple of them. The Planning Commission, they state that the Planning Commissioner members went on record multiple times on multiple Planning Commission meetings stating that the house does not meet the town's development standards. Only 2 Planning Commissioners went on record saying it didn't meet the development standards. All 5 of the other ones at one point, at the first meeting or the second meeting, went on record saying that the house didn't need to be redesigned. They cherry-picked the development standards and said that the design of a proposed addition shall complement the existing resident. Well, I'm not putting an addition on the house, so I don't know how this applies to my project. The projects should be designed to fit a site's natural conditions rather than alter the site to accommodate a stock building plan. The site's completely flat. I'm not modifying the site at all. They state that the new structure is only 25 feet shy of the maximum allowable on the lot. It's within the FAR, and it's actually 240 square feet shy of the maximum allowable. They said that there's widespread neighbor opposition, but at the Planning Commission, only 2 neighbors spoke in opposition, which were the 2 appellants. They claim that there's an estimate of reduction of value of adjacent and near property ranging from tens of thousands of dollars to over $100,000. I contacted Larry Stone, who's the Santa Clara County tax assessor. I've known him. I was a neighbor growing up with him. I've known him for over 30 years. He spoke to me not as the tax assessor, but someone who has had 35 years in dealing with property values, and he stated that unless a property has a spectacular view of the ocean or the Silicon Valley up on Skyline Boulevard, the loss of a glimpse of the ridgeline would not have a significant effect on the property value. There are more important factors to consider when assessing a property's value, such as the school district, lot size, and location. In response, I'd like to say that I feel that I've worked closely with the town. The appellants claim after the Planning Commission they finally found the development guidelines. Well, I found the development guidelines before I bought the property.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Mandolin? Mr. Wasserman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Mr. Mandolin,
Yes.
one comment that was raised by the appellants was the upstairs. One comment that was just made by you as the applicant was the idea of taking a bedroom off the top and putting it down on the bottom. That was discussed at one point.
That was never discussed.
I'm sorry, you just mentioned it, just a minute
Well,
ago.
I did that as a theoretical. I do not want to move any bedrooms down. All the bedrooms in the house are upstairs. I want to keep the public area of the house downstairs. I want to keep the private area of the house upstairs. That's how it was designed, and that's how I worked it out with my architect. So that's my...
Okay, you threw me off when you raised that. I thought it was something that had been discussed previously.
In their appeal, they requested that I reduce the size of the upstairs. That's what their appeal says. In order for me to do that, I would have to, I don't know what I would have to do, reduce the size of the bedrooms, move one downstairs. I don't know, because I haven't looked into that.
Okay.
And it's something
that's
that
fine.
I'm not really willing to do.
That's fine. The reason I asked you the question was when you brought it up, you mentioned another neighbor. If you moved the bedroom from the top to the bottom, that'd be pushing the house back, which another neighbor would have opposed.
Yeah.
So I had a question about that, but that was not something you pursued.
No, it's not something
Thank
we
you.
consider.
Other questions for Mr. Mandel and Mr. Glickman?
As I'm very pleased to hear that you spoke with your neighbors.
Yes, I did.
That's a suggestion that we hope every applicant receives at the beginning of the process. Was that not suggested to you?
That was not suggested to me.
Okay, thank you very
I
much.
spoke to the neighbors at the DRC meeting. At the first DRC meeting, one neighbor showed up with a concern. I offered to make the changes he requested. And then I needed to go talk to my two adjacent neighbors. I went to their houses, went and sat at their kitchen tables, reviewed the plans with them. They both showed up at the second planning commission meeting, and I made changes to the house to accommodate them also.
Thank you very much.
Other questions for Mr. Mandelin? No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, we do have a couple of speaker cards here, and this will be 3 minutes. First one is Dan Wiles.
Thank you. My name's Dan Wiles. I live at 16359 Inglewood Avenue, across the street, down one and a half houses from the project there. I became aware of it and the fact that Mr. Perez came by and talked to me and was concerned about, the privacy. And in talking to the other neighbors, Mr. Kelly Coffey, about the privacy, the view into the back of his home and the loss of privacy there, which, leads me to oppose this because of that. And then I become aware that it would become the largest house on Inglewood by some, and I'm not totally sure of these figures because I've got mixed figures from both sides, but it looked like be the largest house on the block by some 1,000 square feet. And there again, I'm opposed to these monstrous homes coming in and changing the harmony of our neighborhood there, which is, old neighborhood. I'm not opposed to new homes being built. There's several on our block there. But the monstrous home doesn't fit with the neighborhood, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if there's any questions for Mr. Wiles. Yes, there is. Mr. Brzezinski?
No, it's not for Mr. Wiles, it's for the staff at this point. Okay.
All right. Hold on. Can you hold on?
It's in relationship to this. It's about the square footages, actually, and I think we need to clarify that.
All right.
Okay. Can I ask Mr. Lortz, we've had a couple of times where the number 5,000, something like that, has been indicated. And in the project summary statement on page 3 of your staff report, it says the applicant is requesting approval to demolish an existing family residence and construct a 4,652 square foot home and a 898 square foot 3-car garage. The allowable floor area is 4,677 and 1114 for the garage. Then there was a chart in the packet as well that indicated a different sizing. So would you clarify that for us?
The chart that I think is shown as Exhibit U includes garage and house as opposed to just house. The proposed house is 33 square feet larger than the largest in the neighborhood, and I have a chart for you.
Is this one that we don't have already, Mr. Lortz? All right, now we have one more card on this matter. Citizen Ray, this will be 3 minutes.
Thanks. Yes, I would like to speak from a community viewpoint. Okay? Number one, this application in my opinion, fails the neighborhood compatibility test 100%. I drove by the home today. The neighborhood is overwhelmingly single-family, one story, okay? The home on each side of the structure is one story. It's a one-story neighborhood, basically. So how can it possibly satisfy neighborhood compatibility? It cannot. At 4,600 square foot and 900 square feet for a garage, the combination is 5,600 or so. That's a monster home anywhere, and particularly in this neighborhood. And if you don't understand it, I cannot understand how you could possibly serve as a planning director. And I want to speak to that issue. Mr. Lortz, in my opinion, is the director of overdevelopment in community development in Los Gatos, okay? This guy has set up the DRC so that it only approves. In the last 5 years, according to Mr. Lortz, before the Planning Commission, 289 homes have been approved. None have been turned down by the DRC. The reason why? Because they're all employees that work for Lortz. And Lortz tells them what to do, how to vote. It is a total corruption. So anytime you use the DRC, it is a total corruption of the land use process in the state of California. And I will never go away until it's corrected. And this guy is fired. Furthermore, Lortz makes a recommendation for approval. He's met in secret numerous times with the developer. No public perusal at all. The town code prohibits him, does not give him the right to recommend approval, okay? The only right he has, according to the town code, is that he's to investigate and report. Does that sound like a recommendation? I don't think so. He's abusing, again, his duties. And is it a question of money? I wonder. I really wonder. Mr. Larson, you're new. I need you to investigate. You've heard the people complain about the process.
Thank you.
How incompetent and how corrupt it is.
Thank you. All right, now I have no other cards for speakers from the audience, and so since the appellant has the burden here, I am now going to turn this over to Mr. Mannerlin for 5 minutes. But before I do that, Mr. Lortz, did you want to share some information with us on the overhead, or what would you like to do?
Yes, the clerk has the spreadsheet that was prepared for the home, and then separating out the garage and the lot size for the neighborhood. As we warm that up, the 4 approaches that we take to ensure neighborhood compatibility is first the empirical methodology, the floor area ratio, and then the next approach is site design. The third is architectural design, and then, of course, and most importantly, is fourth, neighborhood input. The issue here is that the FAR is within the range of other homes in the neighborhood, and you'll see that in just a moment once the clerk gets this on the overhead projector. And then the second was site design, and with regard to the site design, one of the major redesigns of this project was to remove the garage from an attached garage approach and place the garage in the backyard, thus significantly reducing the mass and scale of the home. In the neighborhood, what we found is that some of the homes, some of the larger homes have attached garages along the frontage, and that significantly increased the mass and scale of the home. We chose an approach where the the garage was removed from the house and placed on the rear of the property, thus significantly reducing mass and scale. And then third, in terms of design, we used a variety of approaches, hip roofs and lowering the roof mass to address the overall height of the home and the design of the home. And then also we had input from the neighbors and followed that process through the DRC. But as you can see on the table that's provided, the home is about 33 square feet larger than the largest home in the neighborhood, and within the range of the FAR of other homes in the neighborhood.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Mannerlin, you have 5 minutes.
I'd just like to reiterate that I feel that I've worked closely with the town. I feel I've worked closely with the neighbors. This isn't a case where the town's consulting architect saw it one way and the DRC saw it another way and the Planning Commission saw it a third way. This is a case where all three of the reviewing bodies came to the same conclusion. The town's consulting architect approved the project, the DRC approved the project, and the Planning Commission approved the project. They're the experts. They're the ones that, we pay their salaries, and we've hired them to uphold the development review guidelines. And I've worked with them to ensure that this project meets all those conditions throughout this whole process. And then finally, I'd like to reiterate the conditions that the town council must find in order to overturn the Planning Commission's decision, that there was an error or abuse of discretion on the part of the Planning Commission, there's new information was submitted to the council during the appeal process, or an issue or policy over which the commission did not have discretion to modify or address. I don't think it was shown by the appellants that any of those criteria were met, and I think that looking back at the information in the staff report, the public testimony, the reports that the Planning Commission received, I think that there's more than enough evidence to show that they tried to make us work it out ourselves. They gave us the opportunity to resolve it. They continued the matter to allow. And looking at the record, that was the only solution that they could come to. And also, the vote was 4-2, so it wasn't like it was, it was, that's why we have a commission of 7 people. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. All right, the appellants, collectively, 5 minutes.
Okay, so first of all, thanks again for the deliberative process that the town provides. I actually, as a citizen of the town, never had a chance to come down here in high school and, in the years that followed, so I'm impressed. It really is interesting to watch the machine in motion. But I obviously do have a contention and kind of a complaint that I'm trying to wrestle with here, so on with that. I still think that we've got an issue of process, notification of neighbors. I think common sense would say if you're going to put 2,300 square feet up in the air, a lot more than the original structure up in the air, that you should notify more than the neighbors that were notified. That's one thing. Second is, I think the scale is off. It doesn't meet the requirements. And I think the people that visit the lot, go out in the backyards, they see that. And it's unfortunate that we got a ways out and figured that out, fumbling through the process. I don't wish harm towards builders. I don't have a problem with Patrick per se. And, we come here not happy to bring burden upon them. But we also have a burden of the loss of privacy, loss of views, and loss of value. The 4-2 vote, I think that's a little bit of a contentious point in that 2 were strongly against, 1 wavered, and the only reason she voted for was this issue of, the burden of time and the amount of process that we've been through so far. So I don't think it was as clear as 4-2. Anyhow.
I did attend the DRCs, and I do want to make clear that they in no way told us that we could request a design review or a redesign of the home. Basically, when we went in, they said this totally compliant to the FAR. So, I think that kind of just, muted a lot of bit of the concern from the neighbors that were present at the meeting.
My last, as I stated in my statement, my earlier statement, there's definitely an issue of judgment here, and there are multiple people that do feel that the guidelines are in addition to the FAR. By definition, if you don't meet the technical specs, the house will not be approved. So the guidelines are supposed to be superimposed. And my question is, at what point do you impose the guidelines? What will require, does the building has to be, the biggest one in all of Los Gatos in order to have it, to have the guidelines be enacted? So, my question to you as a town council, and specifically since we heard the planning commission not clear on when and how they're supposed to interpret those guidelines. I think that it's up to you also to give some guidance to them as well as us as to how to interpret and how to use those guidelines. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you, sir. All right, I'm now closing the public hearing, and we'll turn to the council and Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have two questions of Mr. Lortz, if I may, or maybe Mr. Lortz.
Go ahead. Why don't you do your questions, and maybe he'll have an answer that fits in with his.
Thank you. I have two questions for you, Mr. Lortz. First question, the handout that you just gave us. I need to understand the homes that are on here versus the homes that are on here. Because when I drove to Inglewood, I saw a number of homes, and there's 7 more addresses here on Inglewood in between these addresses that aren't on this sheet. So I wondered if it was a question of maybe Los Gatos homes in the county, or new construction, old construction, or...
The one that you're referring to is which exhibit there?
This just happens to be, it's on the petition regarding new home construction.
I couldn't tell you where that information came from.
Okay, from my own drive-bys that I did, I went through and I took the list that we had from our staff report, because I wanted, you can see numbers on sheets, but they don't always look the same in real. So I was going through the sheet, and I'm going through, and I'm going, okay, there's that house, that's this one, and then I go to the next one, and that house wasn't on our list. And then I went through, and that one's on our list, and that one, and then that one's not on our list. And I noticed one's missing, and it seems to be the same 6 or 7 that's missing from here, just a coincidence.
I don't know if those were county, in the county pocket, because there are parts of Inglewood that are in the county.
Okay.
But we should have that on our information.
They're in between, like here's 16400 and 16407 is not in the 60, so they're in between the houses that are on this sheet. And I've got the specific addresses I can give you later, but that was my question, why some were on and some were not on. Second question, if I may, Madam Mayor? Thank you. Just for the public's knowledge, once the story poles go up, and we call them story poles because they tell a story, okay? Once the story poles go up, and I believe they're up for about 30 days, 28, 30 days.
They're on for prior, at least 10 days prior to the public hearing.
Okay, and my question for you, and you just read my mind right there, my question for you is, once the story poles go up, what opportunities does the public have to listen in, voice their opinion, object, whatever, to the proposed project?
The notice that's sent out for any of these types of projects indicate that there's a notice of intent to approve. If you have any objections, come down to the planning department and identify what those objections are. And then we immediately get the applicant and the neighbors talking.
Okay, thank you.
Try to resolve the issue.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Lichtman.
Thank you. Also, a similar question of staff. Excuse me. When I asked Mr. Merlin a few minutes ago whether he had been advised at any time during the process that it would be a wise thing to do to chat with his neighbors, he told us that he had not been so advised. I have felt that it's for a long time that's kind of SOP when people have a project, that we should be encouraging them to, at a first step, to go talk with their neighbors. So could you tell us a little bit about what our staff process is as regards to that particular issue?
Madam Mayor, if I may respond?
You may. Thank you.
Greg Larson, Town Manager. Both the planning director and I were surprised when we heard that answer to the question. I talked to the planning director and did reaffirm that it is our standard operating procedure for every planner to tell every applicant at some point during their initial discussion of, have you talked to the neighbors? Will you talk to the neighbors? Encourage you to talk to the neighbors, some discussion along that line, and that is indeed our standard operating procedure. I went back during the course of the meeting, you may have seen me get up and talk to the applicant, and he had me talk to his representative who initiated the discussions with staff, and he could not recall whether or not the planner who he first spoke to mentioned that or not. And unfortunately, that planner is no longer with the town, so we can't do any follow-up on that issue.
Okay, thank you very much, because you just confirmed my understanding that it is our standard operating procedure to advise people pretty much when you're going to do any project, that it's the better part of wisdom to talk to their neighbors, and so I was rather surprised to have heard that. Second, again, and you would address this, it is certainly true that the issue of neighborhood compatibility is subjective. But we have to quantify things. We have to give people advice when they come to the counter. As I look at this list of homes on Englewood, which you just provided, and I see a 4,200 square foot house, a 4,400 square foot house, 4,600 square foot house, and I know the public has been looking at this because it was on the overhead. Someone might say, well, gee, it looks like it's not sticking out very much. If I'm misinterpreting that in terms of how we apply how the staff applies when it gives recommendations to either the planning commission or an applicant in terms of neighborhood compatibility, would it be my understanding that the proposed structure, given the size and FARs of some of the others, is not incompatible, or am I reading this wrong? By the standards that we typically apply.
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
Through the mayor, we would find it compatible because of a number of things. One is, the first test is it the largest home in terms of square footage? But as we know, the measurement tool that the town uses is the FAR. So if you look at that chart, it is not the largest in terms of FAR. So then the next thing you start looking at is mass and scale. And one of the first things we did with this home is remove the garage and pushed it to the rear of the property. As I mentioned before, that significantly reduced the mass and scale. But then we went further and started looking at architecture. And I'd like to just quote page 4 of the Planning Commission staff report in terms of the evolution of the project at DRC. On October 2nd, 2007, the DRC considered the A&S application. The DRC accepted public testimony from the neighbors, Joe and Susie Wall, who expressed concern that the house would block their view. The application was continued to the next DRC meeting to determine if modification to the front setback would mitigate the Wall's concern while not impacting adjacent neighbors. At the October 9, 2007 DRC meeting, the neighbors Jack Kasuchia and Kelly Coffrey stated they did not want the house shifted back on the lot. Joe and Susie Wall reiterated their concerns from the previous meeting. The option of modifying the gable roof to a hip roof was discussed and was accepted by the neighbors and the applicant. So it talks about the evolution and the process that we use in working with the neighbors in terms of changes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right. Do I see or hear a motion? Betty, Ms. McNutt.
Sure. I'll go ahead and put a motion out, and then if I get a second, I'll give you my comments.
Thank you.
So I will move to uphold the Planning Commission decision and to deny the appeal.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. McNutt, seconded by Mr. Glickman, to uphold the Planning Commission decision to deny the appeal. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. You know, we do have very specific criteria that we have to find in order to overturn the Planning Commission. And I really feel there was no error or abuse. We had no new information this evening. And what was the third one? It's not a policy that the commission does not have discretion over. You know, there's been a lot of talk about process, and I guess I look at it in a different way, because to me this whole discussion shows that the process works. There was legal notification, and then those neon orange story poles go up. So anybody who did not get a legal notice had a chance to see the story poles if they were outside of the radius and say, I'm really concerned about this. So that part worked. DRC was appealed. So that part of the process is working. If someone doesn't, excuse me, someone doesn't like what happens at DRC, they have the opportunity to appeal it. It went to Planning Commission. It went to Planning Commission twice in a continued meeting, and that was appealed. Now it's here. So there have been a lot of steps in the process where people can learn about it, have time to think about how it impacts their life, and have a chance to be part of the discussion and part of the process. So to me, this is, I mean, it might not be a process that you like where it's headed, but I do think the process is working. And in terms of neighborhood compatibility, this chart is really very helpful because, and I look at this, if you take out the two houses that are on Shannon and only look at the houses that are on Englewood, you have 7 that are 2-story and 9 that are 1-story. So it's pretty much an even split on those homes in that neighborhood. And, excuse me, you also have 5 houses over 4,000 square feet. So, and several that are over 2,500, over 3,000. And also some smaller homes. So, you know, it's a neighborhood like so many neighborhoods in Los Gatos where it's eclectic, it's a variety, and that's what makes up the charm. So I understand the concerns of neighbors and their fear about what's going to happen in their backyards, which are lovely, by the way. But there really is no basis not to approve this house and not to uphold the Planning Commission.
Further discussion? Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In following Councilwoman McNutt's commentary, which I am in full agreement with, I was looking at the appeal, and the appeal was based on the Planning Commission erred or abused its discretion. And then there's a series of items that are highlighted from the Los Gatos Residential Development Standards. And as I went through those items, and I'm not going to reiterate them here because they're in the public record, but I think that there was a good deal of, in many cases, misinterpretation of the intent or an extension of the interpretation to make the case. But I think as I review this in its totality, it really looks to me like the case was not made by the appellants. And I find it kind of ironic that there are members of our county community who are adjacent to the town who in past times have objected to annexation because the town's residential guidelines were too strict, too rigid, and too difficult to work through process. And yet I know that at least one of the appellants is a resident of the county, and that probably had the tables been turned, the Los Gatos residents would not have had the same degree of ability to respond to, appeal, and testify as regards the nature of the application that they would be facing. So I'm going to be in support of the motion, and it's primarily because as we follow our guidelines, I think that the Planning Commission did not err and did not abuse its judgments.
Further discussion, Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you. I'm not going to be supporting the motion. And trying to express my thoughts in words here. as I told the applicant, the number one concern I had was the total overall size. The number one concern I have is calling the largest home on the block, even though it's under the height, and the setbacks are fine, and the FAR is within our guidelines, and everything else is appropriate. I can't, in good conscience, approve the largest home in the block and call it compatible. That doesn't make sense to me. Mrs. McNutt was right. We went through the process. We have a long, lengthy process that is infamous, if not famous, in getting homes approved, and the quality in this town shows that, the hard work and effort. The design on this is excellent. The lots are beautiful. Everything else is there. And I can't come up with any reason where the new information or the Planning Commission erred, a policy decision. I can't come up with any of those. But what I can come up with inside is that the subjective terms that we have that are called mass and scale and compatibility. That's not a square footage or a fraction like the FAR or anything else. It's a subjective, is that too massive? Is that compatible? What is a neighborhood? And because of all those things, I look at the homes on the street, and it's a mix of single and two-story. So a two-story house to me is just fine. And all the rest, but I just can't go along with the motion because I can't approve a house that's the largest on the street and say it's compatible.
Thank you. Further discussion? Mr. Glickman?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments of my fellow council members because I think they speak to the issue. I was speaking to Mr. Lortz last week and asking him whether when he, both in directing his staff and directing applicants, take into account the direction that's given by the council as part of its discussion on issues like this. And he said that's very much part of his understanding of how policy is made in this town. Sometimes it's formal. I mean, we write the general plan, and sometimes we develop it as we discuss projects like this. And this is not the first time we've had this discussion. I respect Mr. Wasserman's view that he doesn't want to approve the largest house on the street. What I would struggle with there, and I think, as I think back on discussions that this council has had previously, if that were to be the standard, then one could never build a bigger house on any street than already existed there. And I don't believe that that's the direction of policy we've developed. Nor expressed, nor voted on. I do think that the larger the house, the more carefully we look at it. And that is in the general plan, and those are very wise words. On the other hand, neighborhoods do evolve. I recognize that that's a view that we've heard tonight isn't unanimously shared. Clearly, I think it was a concern that was raised during the Planning Commission discussion. I recall that, as I read it, Commissioner King, in discussing the process, said, quote, "We're allowing neighborhoods to change, and I don't think we're supposed to be doing that." Well, certainly that's a policy issue for the council. It's always been my understanding of our direction, policy, and interpretation of our general plan, and we're the folks who get to do that, that neighborhoods do indeed change. They evolve. But we're very careful about that. We don't allow somebody to put in a monster house which is totally incompatible or even significantly incompatible. But we do allow neighborhoods to change. And as I look at a neighborhood that's got numerically adjacent addresses, houses of approximately the same size, and this is a neighborhood that has changed over a period of time, it has evolved, that this project is compatible and well within the boundaries of that evolution. And since it's well-designed and all the things that we've heard tonight, that's the reason I'm supporting the motion, because I do think that it is wise policy, at least it's policy that I support, that we do accept evolution. not that political issue, but we accept the evolution of neighborhoods with a very, very careful eye. And I think that's what, when the folks who signed the petition said, yeah, we want to look at this carefully. Well, it was looked at carefully. 2 DRC meetings, 2 Planning Commission meetings, and a council meeting. So I concur with the previous council members who've noted that there was a great deal of process. And I think the process, and I've heard it said tonight, and I'll concur with it, process is working. So I think that in this case, this project is consistent with the direction and policy that this council has established, and that's why I'm supporting the motion.
Thank you. Sometimes I hear that council people or commissioners go to the meetings and they know what they're going to vote. Well, I will tell you that during the course of your testimony, I changed my mind several times, and then I changed it several more times when I heard my colleagues speak, because these are all really good arguments. And what it is pointing out is that we are balancing difficult issues. Let me talk about a few things that are not convincing to me. One, it is not important to me in my decision this evening that the scope of the issues changed from the DRC to the Planning Commission to the Council. Those issues are defined by the appeal, and they can change. I understand how someone might learn something new and include it in their discussion. That seems like human nature, and it makes sense to me. However, that being said, I also think it is incumbent upon us as residents, neighbors, and so forth, when you see a 30-foot orange netting, to pay attention to it. I think that is also very important. I don't think that that the mass and scale is subjective. I understand that it may not be as objective as a 5-foot setback or a .24 FAR. I understand that. But it's not subjective totally, because what you are doing when you are determining compatible mass and scale is you are examining the neighborhood, and specifically you are examining, for me, the homes adjacent and across from the subject home. And when I was doing that in the neighborhood this morning, and I can't believe that somebody actually knew I was doing it. That's sort of scary. But anyway, when I was doing it in the neighborhood this morning, I did notice that the homes to the side of the subject home were smaller in mass and scale than the subject home, and as was the home across the street, smaller in mass and scale. So I came into this meeting thinking that I might not be able to make a finding of error or abuse, or make one of the findings that one has to make to overturn the Planning Commission. But having listened to you in the audience and having listened to Mr. Wasserman, I can, and that there was an error in looking at the mass and scale as based upon our residential guidelines and what the homes that one is supposed to examine when making that determination. So, having said that, further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Passes 3-2, with the twos being Mr. Wasserman and myself. Thank you all very much. All right, we're going to go on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 6, 506 University Avenue, APN 529-08017. Property owner Arnerchik Revocable Trust. Applicant Dennis Lowry, Capital Ventures. Two things. A, consider introduction of ordinance to rezone a parcel to R1D from RM 1220, zone change Z07001. And sub B, consider adoption of resolution to amend the general plan to medium-density residential, 5 to 12 units per acre, from high-density residential, 12 to 20 units per acre, general plan amendment GPO 7002. We are going to have a staff report, but I'm going to request that, I'm assuming, Mr. Lortz, you're going to give part of the staff report. I'm also going to ask Mr. Korb to be presenting part of the staff report because we have a desk item, and I would just like him to go over that desk item with us. And who wants to go first?
Why don't I let Mr. Lortz go first, and I'll just clarify the issue and the desk item.
Thank you. Mr. Lortz.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, ladies and gentlemen, the property in question is developed with a pre-1941 single-family home, detached garage, and a storage building. The applicant has submitted a proposal to refurbish the existing home and construct 2 new single-family homes. The subject lot is approximately 14,900 square feet, actually 14,948 square feet, where 15,000 square feet is needed for 3 conforming single-family lots in an R1D zoning district. The application before the council includes a general plan amendment and zone change. The Planning Commission has approved the associated variance and parcel map, subject to the town council's approval of the general plan amendment and zone change. The general plan designation for the site is multifamily residential 12 to 20, or as we refer to it, high-density residential. The zoning designation for the site is multiple family 12 to 20 dwelling units per acre. To implement the project as proposed requires a general plan amendment and zone change. Planning Commission reviewed the proposal at its meeting of January 23rd. Several residents on University spoke in support of the applicant's proposal. The Commission voted 5-2 to approve the variance and parcel map and to recommend to the town council that approval of the general plan amendment and zone change. As an alternative, staff recommends the following approach. Retain Lot 1 at the corner of University Avenue and Town Terrace as proposed by the applicant. The parcel would be approximately 5,182 square feet and include the historic home. Amend the general plan designation for that lot to RM 5 to 12, change the zoning of that lot to R1D. This matches the general plan and zoning for the parcels to the south and west of the subject site. Then finally, to retain the existing multifamily general plan and zoning designations on the remaining 9,766 square foot lot, which would allow development of from 2 to 4 units depending on design and tree removal. That concludes staff's report. If you have any questions, we're certainly here to answer them.
All right, well, I'll let Mr. Korb step in, and then we'll go to questions of staff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of the desk item was to essentially modify and explain that modification of one of the alternatives recommended by staff. That alternative, as Mr. Lortz has explained, is to retain the multifamily designation for the back lot rather than having a 3-lot subdivision. But the staff report stated that in order to achieve that particular alternative, that the application would need to be sent back for essentially further work by staff and then brought back ultimately for final approval. What the staff report, what the desk item makes clear is that because the alternative was already considered by the Planning Commission as an alternative version to the ordinance that would otherwise be adopted, the rezoning ordinance, it need not be
that alternative need not be referred back to the Planning Commission for review and recommendation to council before council can take a final action, or I should say the intermediate action, introducing an ordinance that's different from the one that the project proponent is recommending. Simply put, if council were inclined to take staff's recommendation and retain the multifamily, the higher density zoning on the back lot, then you could amend the proposed ordinance with the map that has otherwise been provided in the staff report, in the desk item, and introduce that ordinance tonight without referring it back to the Planning Commission. There was only one additional step that would need to be taken procedurally, and that would be to refer the parcel map back to DRC for review, but that would not require any further action by council.
Questions of staff? Ms. McNutt?
Thank you. I'll try not to choke while I'm talking. The back lot that you were talking about as being multifamily, and you said it could be 2 to 4 units. I just wanted to clarify that if it were 2 units, it would have to be a 2-unit multifamily, so like a duplex. It could not be 2 single-family homes. Is that correct?
They could be attached or detached, so it could go either way. But typically what they would do is a duplex.
And also, I'm assuming that could either be rental or for purchase, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 units?
Correct.
Thank you.
Also, for clarification, the portion of the property under consideration that, should we follow the staff's recommendation, would remain designated multifamily, is that, and I believe this is correct, but I just want to verify it, that's the portion that's further away from University and in towards the Avery, Town Terrace, Rushmore portion.
Correct.
So, because it's, well, I think we're all familiar with the area, that is one of the areas of town where we do have higher density multifamily housing, whereas that's perhaps a little bit less of the case if one looks at all of either University or Wade or Chester. So would it be my understanding that if we follow the staff's recommendation, we're keeping that sort of geographic portion that's more adjacent to the existing higher density multifamily units as that, and then designating the portion nearer to University as single family? Would that be correct?
That's absolutely correct, and I will just go over here to the zoning map to point out actually the only area of town that's high density residential.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And for the record, Mr. Loritz, can you verbalize what you were just putting your pencil around?
It was the area that Councilmember Glickman referred to as the Town Terrace neighborhood.
Other questions of staff? Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Loritz, our stated ratio of owned to rented properties is a ratio of 65-35. Is that not correct?
That's just about right.
All right. And within this current time frame, how close are we to that ratio?
We're very close. And as we know, and the concern here is that for a period of probably 20 years, we didn't see any rental projects. And we saw some at the .com period when it was booming, and then many of those projects are coming back through the process for reversion to an ownership product.
Okay, but as of this point, we're at our ratio that's
correct,
indicated. And then the second point, if I may, Madam Mayor, we have a housing element revision that's coming up, and we know that the numbers are, in my opinion, astronomical. In the Planning Commission dialogue, talked about the loss of multifamily residential sites, and the fact that we do have a housing element that we will have to somehow accommodate, i.e., show the plan to the state that indicates what we are going to attempt to do to achieve their numbers. From the perspective of where we are with that proposal, how are we doing within staff on being able to propose or project the accomplishment of that new housing element or demand?
To meet the regional fair share housing allocation numbers that have been given to us by ABAG, which is the local agency that deals with the Bay Area, it will be an enormous challenge for us to be able to meet those numbers. We are going to be asking for you to allow us to hire a housing consultant to assist us with the preparation of that housing element, but I can assure you this is going to be a very, very difficult challenge.
And just from my position as our representative to the Santa Clara County Cities Association Board, the entire county is experiencing that same difficulty and expressing that same degree of anxiety about the ability to fulfill those numbers that ABAG is presenting us. So it's not just our problem, it's certainly a regional problem at this point.
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Lortz, if we exclude what is called the pre-1941 home on University, if we exclude that, and you may have said it, but I'm still not getting it. How many units of multifamily could one construct on the remainder of the property?
Up to 4.
Okay. And then the other question is, and I should know this because I was on the CDAC when it came before us, but can you refresh my memory as to why the 1941 home is proposed to be turned to Town Terrace?
Because it's currently facing University, and the preference was to rotate it so that the access to the home is off of that busy street.
Okay. All right, any other questions? No? Then, again, if you plan to speak to this or any item, please fill out a card. I would ask the applicant to come forward. The applicant will have 10 minutes, or the applicant's representative. If you could give us your name, please.
Yes, I'm the applicant, Dennis Lowry. First, thank you, Madam Mayor and council persons, for the opportunity to come before you tonight. I would like to start just a little bit with some of the history of what we've gone through. The staff report, I think, does a very great job of memorializing some of the steps. But I think along the way, some of the things that we learned will be helpful in sharing with you as we went through this process. Upon initially looking at the site, and we retained a local architect to work with us, Sandra Payne, we began to realize that initially the existing residence was a residence that really should be restored. And our initial focus really understood that that is a component that really wasn't in question. And so from the very start, we understood that the project, whatever it might be, really needed to get its arms around how that would be restored and how it would integrate with the rest of the site. And so as we looked at that site, we understood that it had a non-conforming side setback, and also its location on the site inherently created some obstructions, if you will, as you looked at the rest of the site. And so as we looked at the site and realized we wanted to retain it, we began to realize early on that by rotating the site, we could solve some of the problems with the basements and the foundations that needed to be resolved anyway, and began to remove the best obstacles that we could remove for the remainder of the site. But as we studied the site, we looked at the urban pattern, we tried to analyze what the community in that local area, how it was interrelating with the site. We realized that we were really at a crossroads, and one that we could not resolve. And so the CDAC process was really a good tool for us. We went into that process and really with the question of not knowing how we should proceed. on the one hand, without knowing everything we know now, we realized that it could and should be a high-density project. And with respecting the zoning and the general plan, really understood that that could be pursued and most probably could yield a very viable project. At the same time, we found ourselves challenged realizing that the immediate neighbors, if not maybe beyond the immediate neighbors, may strongly want to see the urban pattern down University continued and may want to feel, especially with the preservation of the older house, really see the site developed as a single-family residence project. And so we went into CDAC, and I felt we really received a good direction at that time that single-family felt like it could be the prevailing direction. And appropriately, I think, we were guided to work with the Historical Preservation Committee, and we did initially, I believe, just on calendar, and then after that, an actual application. And we did receive their approval to rotate the house and make some improvements by their directions that we incorporated that allowed them to feel comfortable that we were accurately respecting this structure and incorporating all of what they would like to see this house preserved. We then went to the General Plan Committee meeting, and at that time, I think a very fair question was raised, as was raised earlier tonight in the opening, which is what about the fact that this is a high-density general plan and zoned lot, and are we really making a mistake potentially in downgrading or lowering the general plan and the zoning to something that's less? And so after receiving that information, I and our architect, and to the complement of staff being available, worked for about 2.5 months and worked through several different designs and trying to understand how we might put a higher density project on that. And in that process, we began to realize that there were frustrations with doing that. It's true in concept that the general plan and zone in concept supports the possibility of up to 4 units. But in reality, and with exhausting the plan, we have not been able to date to put a plan together that can conform with the current general plan and zoning standards that would do that. It was asked earlier about doing a duplex or could you do single families. And under the current zone, although there may be latitude, by the time you look at setbacks, not only for side and front, but relationship from structure to structure, you can really only build one project, and that would be a single structure project. The single structure project would be further burdened by the fact that you almost inevitably have to do a podium project. That, combined with the financial burden of restoring a house, begins to make the project a very difficult project, especially if you want to see a rental project or a high-density for sale project as well. And so at the end of last year, in finishing our investigation and trying to exhaust it and realizing that we could never make the parking counts work and some of the other criteria, the decision was made to really go forward with the initial direction from the CDAC and supporting direction from the Historical Preservation Committee and go ahead and go to the Planning Commission. But prior to doing that, the most important thing of the process, and we've heard about it from an earlier project here tonight, was with that information I then went and spoke to the neighbors. With the understanding now of exhausting the understanding of how you do a high density, and with the knowledge of fully designing a single-family residential project, I then went door to door and spoke to as many neighbors that would open the door. And in those conversations, consistently and without exception, the neighbors really had an adequate and appropriate feeling that it should be single-family. And so staff reports that I have been neutral all along, and that's true. We went into the first CDAC meeting saying, whatever you want me to do, direct me and we'll follow that. But I can't say that at this point I can adopt that same opinion, because as I stand here tonight, I know that the immediate neighbors and consistently the neighbors around that area feel that single-family residential should be the project to be built as infill on this site. And I think really CDAC got it right when they gave us the direction they gave us. I think the Planning Commission got it right when they understood that the process so far has paid its dividends. It's allowed us to really investigate. And when, at the most, you're talking about one more unit, although in all probability, maybe not even that. And when you realize that if we hold too tight on the concept of the units themselves, we really have not accomplished what we want, because this size site, with the preservation of a historical or an older structure, the costs are associated, and with the need to put a podium project in, pushes all of the ideals of having affordable or rental housing or some higher density housing beyond what it was really trying to accomplish, because it just doesn't yield that kind of a project. So in the end, I would ask that you tonight approve the general plan change and the zoning change. In doing so, allowing me to know that that I wouldn't have to come back here, as was directed, in maybe a month or so, only to hear those same neighbors saying that they don't think the site should be single-family. I would be trying to have to support something and submit something that would be contrary to the immediate neighbors. And additionally, with the fact that in doing that, in the highest probability of exhausting our ability to design it, we have not been able to add one unit unless there's some variance that has not been established yet, or some exception to the zoning, which we have not been able to come up with. And so ultimately, the site, with its configuration, with its proximity, the fact that it's a transitionary site with residential on half of its site, if you will, and high density on the other, I really ask that you would consider the wishes of the neighbors, consider the wishes of myself as the applicant, and consider the hard work that I think I continue to commend staff on, and really making sure they give you all sides of it, and they've held up the ideals of understanding that we have to hold tight to high density. But in reality, the project doesn't yield any benefit if we hold too tightly or even hang on to the fact that our density cannot be achieved on this site, or a higher density.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Lowry? Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Lowry. A couple of things. I went and walked the site on both sides, and although I have a hard time envisioning a fourplex in the back 10,000 square feet, which are called lots 2 and 3 at the time, I believe from what Mr. Lort said that if it was the historical in lot 1, we could have, given the high-density zoning, could be 2 to 4 units. So I have two questions for you. My first question to you is, you say between option A and option B, there's a net gain of 1 unit. In my mind, I see single-family, 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 lot 1, 2, 3, 3 units, or 1941 home pivoted on lot 1 and up to a fourplex on the remaining, which is 5. So I see 3 versus 5. I don't see a difference of 1, I see a difference of 2. Are my numbers good?
No, the question is correct, and I have great respect for Mr. Lortz, and so I don't mean to speak for him, but I think what he might be saying is, if you look at the mathematics of the general plan of the zoning, it allows you to build up to 4 units, and that concept is true. However, as you well know, you have to apply the remainder of the zoning ordinance.
I agree with that. Fourplex wouldn't go there, in my opinion.
Yes.
Okay, that was one. Question number 2, you mentioned several times going around door to door, speaking to neighbors, and the neighbors expressing this overwhelming opinion of the single-family homes, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have a list of such neighbors that have said, we prefer a single-family home, that you've spoken to and that have given this consensus?
I did not create a list. I do have one, and I could present it, but what I had done is I went from door to door and explained it exactly as I had. In fact, I had some handouts. I should have brought them. But some of the neighbors are here tonight, so maybe you can get some feedback from them. But I had asked them whether they prefer one or the other, and the fact that one is supported now and the other is in the application process. And some people didn't have a comment either way.
I appreciate that, and I apologize for interrupting you, and I'm not questioning your honesty. What I'm telling you is, in my 6 years in this seat, people have said this is the consensus, this is how they feel, et cetera, et cetera. And for future reference, and also for tonight, it would help if you spoke to 36 people and 32 said yes, single home, and 4 said no, and here's my name and address. So I was just looking if you had that as additional proof, evidence, whatever you want to say, documentation of your position.
Yeah, very good. You know, I don't, and although I have somewhat of a list and I could give you an estimate, I really expected, and as what I said to the neighbors, is if you have an opinion, write a letter or come to the meeting. I really did think it could be a little hollow to come to a meeting and say I spoke to 25 people and every one of them said it was great and please approve me. And as a result, in the Planning Commission meeting, we did have neighbors go to that meeting. There were letters that were submitted, and some of them are again here tonight. I know a few are not. A couple were elderly and did not have the opportunity to come. I said if you can, you might want to write a letter so that your wishes could be voiced.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Lowry, you mentioned a podium project, and for me, what do you mean when you use that terminology?
My apologies. When you're working with, many times with a single structure that might have multiple units, sometimes the desire is made where you would have parking underneath it, and that's usually a concrete structure. It could be labeled as a basement or a podium, where that structure then creates the platform for the residents to be constructed. In this case, in an attempt to try and put 4 units on the site, we had designed a podium or a basement, if you will, where you would enter to a lower level for parking in an attempt to try and keep as much open space as possible for the ordinance, and then allowing 2-story structure to be on top of that. And that podium is very expensive, but usually it's the only way to be able to get your parking ratios and keep the site footprint small enough to conform to the other criteria.
So if I understand you correctly, you need to have subterranean parking in order to get the 4 units?
Yes.
Okay.
And even with that, we weren't able to get it to comply. We were short.
All right. And you heard Mr. Lortz's answer to my question about why, and I was at the CDAC, but goes to show memory goes. If you can tell me why, from your perspective, you want to move the 41 house from facing onto University to facing onto Town Terrace.
Well, there's a lot of reasons, and hopefully I'll mention the ones that are applicable, but the house is a little longer than it is wide. And so, being that the lot is a rectangle, by reorientating it onto Town Terrace, it allows a narrower lot to yield that residence. In this case, it's 53 feet, I believe, allowing the remainder portion the highest probability of either getting multifamily or single family. Additionally, it was not a bad idea because it resolved the site setback, which is too close right now. So we then, in rotating it, solved all the setbacks so they conformed, and also in its reorientation fixed its foundation and allowed the remainder of the site to yield the highest design probability for access and layout.
If you left if the 1941 house remained facing onto University, what could the density of the remaining portion of the land yield?
We came up with very many designs, I think about 18 different designs in total, although some of them were just variations. And we could still potentially get 2 other units, but it was very awkward, it would be difficult finding the practicality of trying to take some access off of University and other access off of Town Terrace. There was a sort of a house cleaning effect by reorientating it, not only for the setbacks, but it sort of streamlined your access. It also allowed us to try and keep as many trees as possible, which I think is in the report, and especially the larger trees, which the single-family project does support, keeping as many trees as possible on this site. There are some older, larger trees.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Mr. Wasserman.
Yes, ma'am, sorry, very quickly. In the option where the pre-41 home is on Lot 1 and the multifamily on Lots 2 and 3, bless you, I understand the design problem, the podium, the fourplex, setbacks, and all the rest. Was there a design problem with the duplex?
Well, I don't know if you'd say there's a design problem. I would say our biggest obstacle was to try and make it so it didn't look like a big box. In this zone, if you have more than one structure, you need 20-foot setbacks or potentially others, so you can't get more than one structure on the site. And when you build one structure, you want to try and have articulations, and that's the hardest part. In the end, did we achieve that? I don't know. I mean, we worked up a design, and we did the best we could, and I think it had some attractiveness. But in the end, we still could not meet the criteria for parking. We would have to drop down at least to 3 units, and even with that, we would be back down to 2 units in the end. And so, I don't...
Excuse me, and the 2 units is the 2 units I'm talking about, the duplex?
Yes.
On lots 2 and 3. So when you said drop down to that in the end, did you come up with a duplex plan that worked?
We did not. We had a fourplex and a 3-unit, a triplex. Both of those did not work. We knew that down to 2 units would work.
2 would work.
2 would work.
Okay.
But then we felt if you're going to build 2 units, why wouldn't we do 2 single families instead of a duplex? Then there's no net gain. And furthermore, that type of product is potentially a burden in costs as you begin to try and make it a single unit again, and some of the things associated with that.
Thank you.
Question. Mr. Lowry, before we go on to the rest of the testimony, the applicant goes first. You came forward, but I also have a card from Sandra Payne. Have you taken her time, or how does that work?
No, she didn't need to. I don't think she was prepared to make any comments unless you had questions. She handed it in for administrative
Okay, all
purposes.
right. Well, that being the case, does anyone have questions of the architect? No. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, now testimony. The first person whose card I have is Eric Iverson.
I'm Eric Iverson. I live one lot south of the proposed development at 500 University. I went to the planning commission meeting, and I was impressed with the deliberation they made of the housing element and the staff recommendation and the other legal and historic considerations on the project. I think they properly weighted the considerations of the quality and character of the neighborhood south and west of the project to preserve the single-family character. And I'm certainly in favor of the 3 single-family home proposal over the possibility of perhaps a duplex, and especially with regards to the fact that it doesn't sound like it's going to provide any net addition to the housing element. So as an owner of a single-family home in the neighborhood, I'd really like to see some mitigation of kind of the massive, we talked about mass and scale on this other project, the mass and scale of the area that's downtown Terrace is monolithic, shall we say, and this design, in the case of 2 single-family homes, 1 story each, and 2-story next to that, would help mitigate the scale and mass of the monolith next to it, which I think would provide a real boost to that corner visually. And certainly I'd much prefer to see the character of University Avenue as a single-family neighborhood continued rather than encourage additional rental housing next to that historic home on the corner adjacent to my neighbors and myself. So I hope that you'll approve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? No. All right, no questions. Thank you, sir. Lois Morrison Kiefer.
My name is Lois Morrison Keffer. I live at 504 University, right next door to 506 University. I'd like to thank the council for giving me the time to present my case here. My husband, my 13-year-old son, and I have lived at 504 for the past 9 years. We purchased our home in February of 1999. At that time, we had no idea that the house next to us was zoned for multiple housing. We have single-family homes across the street, we have single-family homes on each side, and single-family homes behind us. We're not bordering any apartments or duplexes. We love our home, we love the town. We like the feel of a small town. We grew up in small-town Massachusetts, both my husband and I. We would like to keep the single-family flow of the neighborhood up until Town Terrace. Today, my husband walked our dog through the Town Terrace neighborhood. He saw many, many vacancies in the apartments. I always see vacancies in the apartments on University Avenue. There's a beautiful new building on the corner of University and Route 9 that has businesses on the bottom and apartments on the top. It's a much nicer visual image than what was there before. We appreciate it. The rent for rent sign is always out. I've never seen it taken down there. Being right next door to this unit and being used to having a single-family home next to us, even going to 2 or 3 single-family homes is going to be an adjustment. To go to apartments or condos or duplexes, particularly where people are renting, isn't desirable to us. It would cause more traffic, more noise. Our privacy would be impacted quite a bit. We like the idea of the single-story, and then double-story. The way it was presented in the Planning Commission, there was a flow that would make it go from the single story up to the apartments that we think would look very nice. We were neighbors of the Arnerich family until Paul died a couple of years ago, and we knew the family. They were very nice neighbors. Paul was a police officer for the town of Los Gatos. He's the original resident of that home. And we think it is fitting to preserve the home and make it nicer in his honor. We think that's a nice tribute to his family. So we do have strong feelings. When we first heard that the lot was zoned for multiple housing, we had lived in the house for a while, and I was very concerned. So I called the Planning Commission, and I spoke with Bud Lortz at that time. Sorry.
Thank you, but people might have questions. Any questions?
Okay.
Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. Wait just a second. Let me get this out without killing myself. So I'm trying to figure out where you are on here. This is University, and this is Town Terrace. So are you on this?
I'm right next to 506.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
This is Town Terrace, this is University. So,
Interesting to look at, isn't it?
yeah,
Let me tell you what my question is for you while you're figuring out where you
well, there are
live.
3 houses between Chester and Town Terrace, and I'm in the middle one.
Okay.
So 506 is on the left as you're facing my home.
Okay, so the older home that is staying on lot will be along University, and the 2 new single homes that are proposed will actually not be on University, they'll be on
Town Terrace, but they border my yard.
Okay, that was where I was headed, did you overlap here, and what was your concern about houses that would be around the corner and that they do touch you?
We would share a fence, and their yards would come, right now there's 1 yard that comes up against our fence. Now there will be 3 different homes that come up.
Okay, so your lot goes all the way back?
Not quite as far back as the other, but we would be impacted by all 3 lots to some degree.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Anne Marie Grigsby?
Thank you very much for the town council to be here tonight. I'm always amazed at this incredible process that allows people to actually speak up. And I had the pleasure also to talk during the Planning Commission. We moved recently, about 9 months ago, on University Avenue. We come from the Evergreen area, and one of our desire was actually to move to what I call a community-type town, as opposed to perhaps high-density or neighborhoods, sleeping neighborhoods type towns. So the perspective that I bring here is rather looking at what was discussed earlier. And I think, Mr. Glickman, you talked about this in the previous project. And I found it very, very interesting and for me has a lot to state in this particular case. And what you stated very justly, I thought, was something associated with the evolution of the neighborhoods and the evolution in the sense that things will change in neighborhoods and that it is important to start considering this evolution. What I've seen or what I've heard University Avenue becoming is a single-family home project. The reason why we bought our house is because it has that feel of the neighborhood where I can stop by my neighbor and really share the concerns of ownership and share and stop by and be feeling safe in my own neighborhood. I personally have 2 teenagers, and I am concerned about them going in neighborhoods that would be perhaps less safe for them to go through. So that was definitely a concern of ours when we moved in the neighborhood. So what I'm asking this town council to do today is really to consider, just like the Planning Commission did, consider the fact that the neighbors are really in favor of a single-family home, to continue on the perhaps aesthetic of what University is becoming. This is one of the main streets of Los Gatos, and this is a street that we want to continue to walk to, share concerns, etc., and have the same feel of this little neighborhood community. So I want that council to actually be able to support that project as single-family home, just like the Planning Commission did. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Mr. Glickman.
Thank you very much. It's always flattering to have one's thoughts echoed. But it's my understanding, if we look at the project that the staff is suggesting we consider, that the home on University, which is where you live, remains a single-family home, so that I don't want to call it the facade, but that the run of University remains single-family, and that the multifamily would continue on Town Terrace adjacent to existing. So help me to understand why that doesn't meet the desires that you expressed.
So, and perhaps I didn't express that clearly. What I'm concerned also is that there is not a continuation even in that neighborhood. And if I feel for my neighbor here is really having a disruption within that corner, even though it would face Town Terrace, it's still a block or a multi or high-density building would definitely disrupt, I think, that corner. So my understanding is even if we rotate the house, the 1941 house, and we consider the empty lot in the back end as a multi-family, even though it's not facing University, it's still, in my mind, disrupting the immediate neighborhood. And I would be concerned about that too as well.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. All right, I have no other cards, and so, Mr. Lowry, want to come on back, or do you want Ms. Payne to come this time? The applicant. You have 5 minutes.
I'll try to be brief. in conclusion, I know that the town must be committed to its higher density zones. I know that you rely on them to be able to allow you to meet the different guidelines that you have to meet and to try and see the development fulfill the numbers that you have to be able to deliver. And I think if the configuration of this site were different, or if we did not have an older structure to preserve, then I think that this site might be a real viable site to deliver what it was originally general planned and zoned to do. And in fact, you might get 6 units if you didn't have the older residents to be restored. But I think it is appropriate that we see that even though the general plan and the zoning had contemplated that this is where the town should get some of its density, that it has also been understood that there's a higher ideal that sometimes when you take this residence back from the 1930s, I think is what we came up with, that it should be preserved. And as a consequence, it does create a scenario where this site cannot yield any more density. And if that is the case, then you are saying, then do we pick, for the sake of protocol, a single structure that has 2 units in it? Or maybe if I've made some kind of error, and I don't think we have, because the town has not been able to identify a way for us to conform even 3 units on there. For the sake of protocol, do we go ahead and say, let's have this be high density? Or do we realize that in this case, the reality of the fact that the site only yields about 3 units, isn't it better to begin to complement what's happening all up and down University, allowing the neighbors to understand that that same single-family element and component is fortified or is continuing on that corner, and also I think at the same time allowing, if you will, just that area to sort of be a little bit better defined than just the start of a high-density area. So I would ask that you would support the general plan change in zoning, not only for those reasons, but for the fact that if we said that 3 units are all the same, that product becomes more expensive to try and build a single structure with 2 units in many different ways. It's more massive, and in the end, as you try to make it a rental unit or something else, I don't know that we've made a more appealing product, whether you were a renter or whether you were an owner. So I'll stop with that. I have a little time left, and thank everyone for their time, and ask you again to uphold the project that's before you as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Thank you, sir. Questions of Mr. Lowry? No, thank you. I will now close the public hearing and turn to my colleagues up here. Ms. McNutt.
I have questions of staff. I have a question for Mr. Lortz and one for Mr. Korb.
Okay.
So the question for Mr. Lortz is the comment that 3 or 4 units cannot be built on that back lot. Can they not be built and be compliant, or can they not be built and be profitable?
Probably the latter. It's about size, how large the units are. And it's impossible for me to be able to say whether a project can be designed and built and make a profit for somebody without, really running through the project and looking at alternatives. We just know that there is sufficient room on the site for up to 4 units. And then the challenge of any site is for a design to come forward and wind its way through the process, naturally taking into account neighbor concerns and all the other issues that we face.
Other questions, Ms. McNutt?
And my question for Mr. Korb is, could you run us through, once again, there was quite a bit of discussion in the Planning Commission with the substitute attorney that evening regarding state requirements on approving a variance and what we would need to do to justify that?
Well, actually, you don't have the variance in front of you tonight.
That's correct.
and we just confirmed that with Mr. Lords. The variance was approved by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has final authority to approve the variance unless appealed to council. That decision was not appealed to council, so you don't have to make any findings regarding the variance. However, the variance is conditioned on approval of the general plan amendment and zone change that would facilitate the three-lot subdivision. So you're relieved of those findings and relieved of my explanation.
So I can just do a follow-up then. So my follow-up is that if we were to adopt the resolution approving the general plan amendment, that would imply endorsement of the thinking that went into the Planning Commission's decision on the variance.
One could read the decision that way. You're certainly saying that you would approve a three-lot subdivision on the property, which then assumes that you would approve a three-lot subdivision with the variance required in order to allow it to occur.
Okay.
Mr. Glickman.
Let me try to get some further clarification. So if we were to approve the variance or the general plan amendment that would facilitate the variance, would the net effect of that be that we would then have 3 single-family houses on those lots? Or would we have the staff's recommendation, which is preserving the single family on the university corner and then preserve the higher density on the back lot?
The variance was required in order to allow a three-lot subdivision because the property otherwise is not large enough to ensure that 3 5,000-square-foot lots would occur if a three-lot subdivision were planned. In order to have less than 5,000 square feet on a lot, a variance is required. So the variance, again, is only necessary for a three-lot subdivision. If council's preference were to go with the alternative suggested by staff for essentially a two-lot situation where the multifamily housing is retained on the second lot, then the variance becomes a nullity at that point.
Thank you very much. That was my understanding. I wanted to clarify that.
Other questions of staff? All right, do we have a motion? Mr. Glickman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to move to follow the staff recommendation that was just outlined by Mr. Korb, that we retain the lot on the corner as a single family, and then have the second, I think it's about a 9,000 and change square foot lot, retaining its multifamily designation. So I think that that's the alternative as expressed on page 4 under staff recommendations.
And if I may, Madam Mayor?
Yes, please.
Just for clarity in the record, the alternative that staff suggested that the motion refers to would require that the general plan amendment resolution and the ordinance that would be introduced by the motion, I understand both actions would be taken, would refer to the maps attached to the desk item that was provided to council tonight rather than the maps that were provided along with the original staff report.
That is correct. Thank you.
Before we get a second or not a second question, Mr. Korb, on this desk item that we were given this evening, there are recommendations at the bottom. There are 3 recommendations. Is that the format of the motions that staff is suggesting if we follow where I think Mr. Glickman is going?
Yes, it is, and that's why I asked the question whether the motion was intended to include the general plan, adoption of the resolution making the general plan amendment, and introduction of the ordinance making the zone change.
And if, again, and I have an idea of how I'm going to handle this, but if we were going to follow along with what Mr. Glickman, where Mr. Glickman is going, would staff be suggesting 3 separate motions, or one? You have 3 items here on this desk item?
3 separate motions would not be required. However, again, because you have an ordinance in front of you, it is considered appropriate to ask the clerk to read the ordinance by title and then waive the reading. So those are additional actions that need to be taken prior to the final introduction. But I think what you've got right now is essentially a preliminary motion and some sense of where council, it raises the question of where council is.
What I was thinking is that if we get a second, then we can discuss, and this will give us an idea if we're going to take that approach or not, and if we are, then you can tell us what other steps you want. All right?
That's fine.
Okay. Now, do we have a second to Mr. Glickman's motion? Mr. Wasserman.
I'd like to second for purposes of discussion. May I continue?
You may.
Thank you. In the motion that's, excuse me, I have a question, Mr. Lawrence. In the motion that's on the floor at the moment, it's basically Lot 1, we're kind of splitting Lot 1 off, and it would be a R1D, and then the high density would remain in what is 2 and 3 in that. So you'd have about a 5,000, 5,100 square foot Lot 1 and a 9,800 square foot Lot 2. At the high density, the zoning would allow for 2 to 4 units, and the 2 to 4 unit decision, be it 2, 3, or 4, is then based on our laws and rules and regulations and setbacks and parking and all the rest.
Correct.
There's nothing said in the motion that says it's 2 or says it's 3 or says it's 4.
Absolutely
It
correct.
just maintains the high-density zoning.
The 9,000 and change lot stands on its own, would be a separate application to go through a process for a multifamily development.
With our high-density zoning.
Correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this motion or series of motions when they come before us. Mayor Spector was flip-flopping last time in the previous one, and that's why I've gone back and forth on this one. I very much am concerned about maintaining a variety of housing stock, of keeping that precious high-density area that we have. And I'm also, and I don't like it if we assume that multifamily means rental, or that we assume that multifamily or rental means less than ideal neighbors. On the other hand, I've heard that theoretically we can fit 3 or 4 units on that, but practically maybe we can't. I know there's a tree there that's been in the middle of conversation. We have testimony from the neighbors as to what they think really fits in with that neighborhood. And so I'm just, for the gain of maybe 1 or 2 units, because I don't think anyone really thinks a 4 is going to work there. I really just can't see trying to do that. I don't see the benefit. So I think we have a project that has gone through the process, as we've talked about a lot tonight. It has gotten approval by all of the bodies as it's moved forward, and does have support of the neighbors. Again, I don't see any reason for that not to go forward for a potential gain of only 1 or 2 units. So I would be, if this motion fails, more in favor of a motion to do the resolution approving the general plan amendment.
Thank you. Further discussion? Mr. Brzezinski.
Madam Mayor, my sense is that the Planning Commission got it right. And having been on the CDAC when this first came before us, and having dealt with it perhaps longer because of that, I think that the issue for me very much is related to the quality of the project that will be in this place. I walked the site today again this afternoon, And then I visited the rest of the Town Terrace neighborhood to get a feel for what that environment is. And I would say that when the alternative being proposed is a triplex or fourplex on top of a podium with parking and an attempt to find some space for greenscape versus, and probably a fourplex being impossible, a threeplex on the edge, and I don't know exactly what a threeplex square footage would be. I'm assuming we're not talking about studio apartments. We're talking about something at least in the realm of two-bedroom. And once we start doing that, we're starting to deal with a certain square footage that doesn't allow itself to be kind of truncated in a smaller box. We all know that the needs of people have evolved in recent times, that no one's building studio apartments, and no one's building one-bedroom apartments. And if we look at the number of families that are coming into town, we're probably looking at a much bigger project, even if we were to go for some multifamily. So to me, I don't see a net gain. I think what you'd have is probably a lesser architectural product on the same site with probably no gain of unit space. I think that we have to look throughout our community to find where we can appropriately develop multifamily residences. I would tell you right now, if this council and our planning commission and this staff and probably this community had a blank slate out there at the Town Terrace neighborhood, we would do things much differently and much more architecturally appropriate, and probably gain many more units than the designers in ancient history who produced that particular neighborhood. And therefore, for my purposes, I think the net gain is to move with the project as proposed and as recommended by the Planning Commission. We are going to gain the re-enhancement of the historic home. We're going to maintain the continuity of the neighborhood, in fact, wrap it around Town Terrace so that it's not just cut off there. And I do think that even the university neighborhood is in evolution, because you see so many remodels taking place out there that are developing this into a very attractive community, as was pointed out by the members of that community. So I will not be supporting the motion for those reasons, and I look forward to supporting the motion and then the completion of the project as it has been proposed to us by the applicant and by the Planning Commission.
All right, we sort of have a motion on the table, and I'm going to speak to the sort of, for discussion purposes, motion that we have on the table. Ms. McNutt referenced my mental flip-flopping last time. Well, I'm doing it this time, too. And, these two land use issues that have come up to us this evening from the Planning Commission really have interest to be balanced. I mean, on the one hand, and this is just nothing new, nothing that my colleagues haven't said, but on the one hand, I listen to what the neighbors want. On the one hand, I was on the CDAC that when the single-family issue was blessed. On the other hand, I'm a member of the General Plan Committee, and I wasn't there the evening this issue was discussed, but when I got the minutes, and one of the members of the General Plan Committee raised the issue of keeping more units, and not only the number of units, but the affordability of those units, because 2 or 3 single-family homes versus 2 or 3 multi-family units have a different affordability factor also, not just the number of units. So when I saw that in the General Plan Committee minutes, that struck a responsive chord. When I saw that at the Planning Commission, that struck a responsive chord. When I listened to my colleagues who are now saying, yeah, but you're only going to get maybe one more unit and you can bring the single-family housing around the corner from University, which is admittedly changing its character, that strikes a responsive chord. So where am I right now? I don't know. And so I will start with baby steps by asking the seconder of the motion, who just seconded this for purposes of discussion, if he is going to second it for purposes of moving forward with a vote.
Do I get to say I don't know?
No. Yes, you do, but then we'll have to go back to see if we have another second.
Okay, let me talk out loud for just a minute here as I try and answer your question, Madam Mayor. I like the idea of having single-family homes on University. That makes sense. When you go around the corner of Town Terraces, that's zoned high density. We have a requirement from the state, which I think is unattainable, but that's another issue. We also have a responsibility, I feel, to continue to preserve a mix of housing in Los Gatos. On the one hand, this property now, which is one lot, is zoned high density, and I'm certainly in favor of subdivision for the pre-1941 home being subdivided off, and I appreciate the restoration of that home and all the rest. Where I'm torn is, should the remaining 9,900 square feet, approximately whatever number that is, be two homes, as the Planning Commission said, by a 5-2 vote, or does a duplex or perhaps a triplex, which is consistent with the high-density zoning that exists there? We talk about transition, where you've got single-family home, single, and then high density, or maybe single-family home, duplex, triplex, and then high density. I've heard arguments from both sides, and I think, Madam Mayor, to answer your question, and it's a very difficult one, and the only ones that reach us are very difficult. That's how it is up here. That's why we get the big bucks. But I think where I am right now is supporting the motion because it makes a single-family home on University, preserves a historical landmark, and then gives a transition behind it to the high density, maintains our high density zoning. I don't want Los Gatos to become all apartments, and I don't want Los Gatos to become all single-family homes. And this is kind of a compromise in the middle.
So do we have a second? Yes?
Yes, I seconded my second.
All right.
Yes.
And I will be supporting the motion. Further discussion? See, you can't discuss.
I know, I'm just, when you're ready.
All right, do you want to give input before we act on this motion?
Yes, I would like
Okay,
to.
yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What I'm going to ask you to do for a moment is set the motion aside and take just two preliminary actions. Again, the motion includes the introduction of an ordinance. Normally, we have the title read and then act by motion to waive the reading of the full text of the ordinance. As you know, I'm going to refer to attachment 5 in your packet, so the clerk doesn't have to find the ordinance title. Then she's prepared. If the mayor is willing to ask the clerk to read the title, she can do so.
As part of this pending motion?
Correct. This is the title of the ordinance that you would be introducing if you were to approve the motion as made.
All right, and before we do that, Mr. Przinski?
Yes, so if I understand what's being proposed and apparently what's being approved, that the intention is that there will be a return of this after a new proposal has been developed, a return to staff and the Planning Commission with some proposal for a duplex or a triplex. That's what's going to occur here, because what we've got right now is we've got an approval on the historic home being rotated to Town Terrace, and then a blank slate on the rest. That's what I understand. And we don't have anything else then on the table. So this in effect is telling the applicant to go back and start that part of the process over. That's what I hear.
All right, and let me ask, one, is that accurate, and if and what would the alternative be had we proceeded the way the council, the commission went?
I'll take a run at this, if I may, Madam Mayor. If council were to approve the motion as made, then what you end up with basically are two lots. The change, as Mr. Brzezinski points out, to rotate the historic house on the front lot would also be approved and could occur. However, there is no pending proposal, let's call it an architecture and site proposal, with regard to the other lot. But that's the case today as well. Today, you have a proposal to subdivide into 3 lots, but you do not have at this time an architecture and site application regarding those 2 separate lots. Those would still have to go through process and perhaps someday go to the Planning Commission and maybe council as well.
All right, and so that being said, is the clerk prepared to read an ordinance, please?
Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending the zoning map from RM 12-20 to R-1D for property located at 506 University Avenue.
Now, Madam Mayor, the next action would be a motion to waive the reading of the full text of the ordinance.
So moved.
And if I could just clarify,
Well,
Madam Mayor?
hold on. Next thing that we do, but we haven't voted on this. Wouldn't you want us to vote on this first?
No, before you vote, remember the motion as made would include introduction of the ordinance and approval of the resolution making the general plan amendment. So before you take action on that, the preliminary steps are to read the title and waive the reading of the rest of the ordinance.
All right.
And my motion was to waive the reading.
Okay. Mr.
Second.
All right. Now, do you want another step?
You need a vote on that motion.
All right. Mr. Brzezinski.
And I need a clarification. So an affirmative vote on this motion means that we are approving the single-family residence that is currently on site and the movement of that site, and then the other site being designated for multifamily. Is that correct?
I'm going to, I would answer it, but I'm going to go to Mr. Korb.
The motion that was made by Mr. Glickman and seconded by Mr. Wasserman, which is the introduction of the ordinance with the alternative recommended by staff and approval of the general plan amendment, is essentially, for the moment, tabled. The motion before the council right now is just a preliminary step to waive the reading of the ordinance. The text of the ordinance doesn't change no matter what action council takes. It's only the maps that are attached to the ordinance that would change. So my recommendation would be to waive the reading because it doesn't make a difference regarding the substance of the project.
Okay. And Madam Mayor, the reason why I asked the question is that I want to be able to vote to say, yes, the preservation of the historic home and the movement onto Town Terrace as its frontage is supportable, but I am not in support of the remainder of the proposal, and I want to know how to bifurcate that so that that can be clear, because I think in the past we've had motions where that's not particularly clear and people have had to try to adjust subsequent to the vote.
I agree, and we're struggling a bit here because I don't think what staff would like best from us is before us. And so that being the case, I have all kinds of notes here. What I'm going to ask is either Mr. Lortz or Mr. Korb to give us the motion as they would like it at this point.
My first recommendation is to act on the motion to waive the reading of the full text of the ordinance. I think it's a preliminary step. It doesn't affect the substance of the project, and it will get that out of the way. Then we can discuss the motion that is on the floor regarding the project itself.
You want us to waive the reading, and you want that done by a motion and a vote.
Right. You already have a motion that has been seconded to do that. You just need to act on that motion.
Yeah, and Mr. Glickman, we have that motion. Mr. Wasserman, we have that second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. Now what do you want?
Now, you have a motion to approve the resolution making the general plan amendment. You have, and also at the same time,
Wait, approve the resolution.
that makes the general plan amendment as recommended by staff, meaning attaching the map contained in the desk item that was presented tonight. And the motion further would introduce the ordinance, again, attaching the map for that purpose, that is attached to the desk item that was presented to council tonight. In both cases, you would, by that action, facilitate the alternative recommended by staff, which creates a two-lot scenario and preserves the multifamily housing designation on the rear lot, but does facilitate the zone change on the front lot. Regarding the rotation of the home, that's, excuse me for just one moment.
Are you sure?
The project plan calls for the historic home to be rotated. Neither of the two actions that were recommended by staff in either event, in fact, requires or approves that action. That's basically the project as currently proposed by the applicant. Further action will be necessary, additional applications and so on, to facilitate that final result. However, if council wishes to take a position with regard to that aspect of the project, then council can give direction of that sort to staff, which will affect, of course, staff's review ultimately, and the Planning Commission review, if necessary, or DRC review of any subsequent application regarding the rotation of the home. So you can act on the motion concerning the general plan amendment and the introduction of the ordinance, and if you're not satisfied with that outcome, but still approve the rotation of the home, that can be a separate direction given by council to staff.
And in following up with Mr. Przinski's question, at this point, since we would be adopting the general plan amendment as recommended by staff and introducing that ordinance,
I'm sorry.
I know, I'm going to try
Can you
again.
repeat the question? I apologize.
Following up on Mr. Przinski's concern, if we follow through with this motion to approve the resolution and making the general plan amendment as recommended by staff in our desk item and introducing the ordinance, we would then be having a two-lot subdivision, and so therefore we would not have the 3 lots, and people who would want 3 lots would be voting against this motion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, Mr. Glickman, do we have that motion?
We do, and just for...
Wait a minute, let me, hold on just a minute. Mr. Wasserman, do we have a second?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Glickman.
Okay, just for clarification, it is the wording and intention of the motion, exactly as Mr. Korb said, to do the 2-lot subdivision, to modify the, I'm going to call it the front lot, to make it a single-family lot. It does not require rotation or anything else, but it makes it a single-family lot, but preserves the zoning of the rear lot as multifamily. So the motion goes no further than zoning designation. It doesn't talk about rotating or how many things we put on anything. It just says we are moving to split off one front lot with a historic house on it to preserve that, make that single family, but we're retaining the rearmost portion of that property zoned as multifamily, and if I can just editorialize a little bit, very much for the maker of the motion's reason, for the reasons expressed by the mayor, which are to preserve the affordability of that part of our housing stock in that area. That was the motivation for the motion, but the action and the words of it are single family in the front, multifamily in the back.
Further discussion? Mr. Corbett?
I'm sorry, just to add on to what Mr. Glickman said, it is both the introduction of the ordinance and the adoption of the resolution making the general plan amendment. Both actions would be taken by the motion.
Mr. Wasserman?
Thank you. And I just wanted to explain, the reason this is so difficult and awkward is we're looking at taking a piece of land out of our high-density zoned area, okay? Taking one piece out and converting it to single-family residence. In my 6 years, I don't recall that ever having happened before. And that's what's taking place, and that's why I think there's some awkwardness and uncertainty here on exactly how to go about doing what it is we're trying to accomplish.
Further discussion? Take that.
I just want to comment on the comments regarding affordability, that the proposed two single-family homes, which apparently are going off into the sunset, were very modest homes. I mean, they were very small lots, about the same size as my tiny little lot that I live on, less than 5,000 square feet thereabout, and, fairly small homes, 1,800, I think it was 1,600, 1,800 square feet. So, that's another type of affordable product that we need for small families and for beginning families who are trying to get into the Los Gatos market. So I'm really, I'm not seeing the point of this for gaining one additional unit. But apparently, I'm losing.
Okay, further discussion? Mr. Brzezinski.
Yes, maybe this is like beating a dead horse, but I think that Councilwoman McNutt has very clearly demonstrated that we're almost talking as if these are monster homes, when in reality these are part of a housing stock that we have very few of today in town. There are an awful lot of people who would love to be able to purchase a home in town at 1,800 square feet and raise a family in that home, and aren't interested necessarily in renting or in living in a multifamily complex. The reason why I asked at the beginning of the discussion where our ratio of rental to owned property is because I think that we can sometimes go askew in our thinking and suddenly find ourselves directed only towards one type of housing as if it's absolutely essential, when, as Ms. McNutt points out, we have a multiplicity of housing types that make the fabric of this community. And I would guess that we have, if indeed our ratio continues to maintain itself, that is 65% owned, owned and lived in by the residents who are the owners, and 35% rental, and we indeed still have that ratio that's being maintained. That's our goal. That's our stated goal. Our stated goal is not 40% rental, 60% owned. It's 65-35, and it's like so many things in this town. It's the balance that makes this place the way it's supposed to be. I would think that, along with Ms. McNutt, that the idea of an 1,800 square foot house that would come on the market might be a really good starter home for some family who can only afford $800,000 to get in, or whatever it's going to be. But the idea that you have homes in that market, in that smaller single-family owned residence market, is appropriate. And just as we are concerned about how large the homes get within context of neighborhoods, I think we should also be very cognizant of the fact that if we start giving up opportunities for that part of the housing stock, then that part of the housing stock will disappear. And we will have actually, by this motion, acted against what we're attempting to do to maintain the fabric of this community and the different types of homes that we present to our community for sale and for rent. So I'm going to, again, reiterate my opposition, and it's never too late to change your vote.
That's true. And it's what's really great about these kinds of discussions is they allow you time to think about what other people are saying and what the audience has said, and to have your thoughts gel. And I said, this is a very difficult one because we're balancing interests that are very close to one another. But as I listen to what everybody's saying, and I'm thinking to myself, so why are you supporting the RM zone instead of changing it to an R1? These people are making sense, so why is it? Well, it's sort of like a continuum. It's because I'm really proud of the fact that even though Los Gatos is a very desirable community, it has 35% rental. I'm very proud of the fact that even though Los Gatos is a very desirable community, we've been having BMP below market price units since 1979, 1980 when I was on the Planning Commission. And even though a 1,500 square foot house may be more affordable in Los Gatos than a 3,000 square foot house, I know that in downtown Los Gatos, a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot house can cost as much as $1.5 to $2 million, that you need to put 35% down to purchase it and have to have a family income of something like $250,000. So it's still difficult. And the benefit of the RM zone within that context is that it provides housing, be it rental or ownership, to those who might not be able to afford a single-family home. So, further discussion. Good. Oh, Ms. McNutt.
Just one more thing, and that is, I think they're leaping to some assumptions as to what this multifamily could be, because there are some if I were the builder, I would be going for the highest quality product that I could fit on there at the highest price point, because that's what you do. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that these condominiums that might be built for sale are going to be any cheaper than a single-family home.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes with no votes by council members Brzezinski and McNutt. And I thank the audience and the council for a very thoughtful input and thoughtful discussion.
And Madam Mayor, just for the record, I will be bringing back the ordinance for final adoption probably at your next meeting.
Thank you. Agenda item 7, adopt resolution establishing the general plan. No. 7, adopt resolution establishing the general plan update advisory committee. Staff report.
Who says planning isn't fun? Madam Mayor, members of the council, on February 4th, 2008, the council approved the preliminary work plan and schedule for the general plan update. The council also discussed options for a general plan advisory committee. The council selected the option that utilizes the existing 9-member general plan committee with up to 10 at-large members to provide the broad community representation desired by council. Staff has developed a resolution establishing the General Plan Update Advisory Committee, which is attached to your staff report. The committee is proposed to be comprised of the existing General Plan Committee and up to 10 members at large from the community that would be appointed by the Town Council using a process similar to that used to select members of other town boards and commissions. This would be a separate committee from the General Plan Committee and whose sole purpose will be to advise the Town Council on the General Plan update. The Council has indicated that additional committee members should provide a broad community representation and should not be members of the existing town committees. This preference is included in the resolution. The resolution also clarifies the duties of the committee, appointment and term of office. The inclusion of additional issues or modification of the approved scope of work and timeline requires town council approval. If the council approves the resolution officially establishing the committee, staff will conduct a townwide outreach effort publicizing the opportunity to serve on the committee. An article about the committee is being included in the upcoming edition of the Vista. Staff will also contact applicants for recent committee openings and invite them to apply, along with community members that expressed an interest at the general plan update, at recent town hall, in the neighborhood meetings. The committee openings will also be noticed in the newspaper, the town website, and through the town's electronic mailing list. Once applications are received, staff will return to town council with detailed recommendations on a selection process for the at-large members of the committee. As an alternative, the council may choose to allocate one or more of the at-large positions to representatives of commissions, organization, or constituents directly related to issues being addressed through the general plan update. If the council chooses to allocate one or more positions described, staff will focus additional outreach efforts as appropriate. That concludes staff's report.
Thank you. Questions of staff? I had one question. In looking at your resolution, as I listen to you talk, I understand that there's going to be an outreach, and then people are going to apply, and then the council will interview and select. But in your resolution, you have the at-large members representing various geographic areas, community interests, and organizations. But if a big group of people apply and we select 10 of those people, they may or may not represent various organizations or business interests. And so I just didn't know how your process jived with the resolution.
The terminology that was included in the resolution that's attached essentially came from the general plan task force for the 2000 general plan, and what the council wanted to do at that time, that may not be the current thinking of council, was to really look at the community and try to get as broad a representation as possible. Represent different organizations, geographic areas. So when the selection process went forward, there was a map that showed where every applicant was located, and the council was trying to go east to west, north to south, and we thought that the council might be receptive to that for this.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Glickman.
Yes, I want to commend staff because this, I think, is very reflective of the discussion that we had and the direction that we gave. I want to be clear that the language that says that the 10 at-large members shall represent various geographic areas, community interest and organizations, and so on, that it is the intent, direction, and in fact the legal underpinning of the resolution, that the council intends in its selection process to make sure that those segments of the community are represented, but we are not in this language setting aside seats on that at-large group for a particular group or a particular area. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further questions, we do have a speaker, Citizen Ray. 3 minutes.
Yes, indeed. One thing Mr. Lawrence has left out, and I want to bring to your attention, is one of the main issues to be discussed in this general plan update is youth recreation, okay? Now, he left it out tonight. And I want to tell you, I want to put you on notice that those of us who work for Yes on D will be represented. 4,000 people of this community voted yes on D, and we refuse to go away. We refuse to be shut out of the process, okay? As I told you last time, 3 of you used the Nazi techniques to lie and confuse, in my opinion, the electorate of this town, okay? So here we have a brand-new opportunity for the 4,000 strong to be represented, and we will be. These commission meetings are Brown Act meetings, of course. So whether we're appointed or left out of the process because of your machination, we will be there and we will speak out for the kids. The kids that have been relegated to the mean streets of Los Gatos. And it's going to change. Believe me. If you don't believe me, stick around. You will represent us because that is your duty under the law. There are 4 branches of government in general law cities: police, library, parks and recreation, and so forth, okay? So we will be asking that you represent the kids that you have discriminated against. Total discrimination. And Brzezinski shakes his head. Foolish man. Okay? So we want to be represented as no more of this taxation without representation. Any of you familiar with that term? Taxation without representation. That's what 3 of you represent. And it's going to, you just wait and see how we play the game, okay? We want a skateboard park for the young kids, our future citizens. Why you don't, I cannot imagine. Shame on you.
Thank you. All right, no further cards. Close the public hearing and turn to Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to a couple of comments that were made in Mr. Davis's usual blustery way. He's speaking to item number 7, which is to adopt the resolution establishing the General Plan Update Advisory Committee. And the reason this update committee is being established is to have representation and to update our 10-year-old general plan. And the 4 areas specifically designated by this town council were environmental sustainability, which is the green issues, seniors, recreation, which is our youth recreation, and also our needs for youth. So this council has given direction to create a general plan update advisory committee to solicit the input of the public for the specific reason of addressing those items that were just raised. We're doing the exact opposite of ignoring the will of the people. We are specifically gathering representation from the public in order to implement the will of the people.
Thank you. Do I have a motion? Ms. McNutt.
I'll move to adopt the resolution establishing the General Plan Update Advisory Committee.
Second.
Motion by Ms. McNutt, seconded by Mr. Glickman. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, now we have agenda item 2. Accept the 2006-07 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, CAFR, and Management Letter. This item has been pulled by Citizen Ray, but before he speaks, can we have the staff report on that?
Madam Mayor, staff is available to present a report following the public question.
Fine, that's fine.
Well, I thought there was staff report.
No, they said that they were going to defer it.
Oh, okay. You got to keep me posted, you know. Yes, I wanted to bring to the attention of the council and to the public some thoughts about the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, called CAFR, C-A-F-R acronym, okay? Says here, the Finance Committee also confirmed with staff and the independent auditor that the $37.9 million of unrestricted net assets shown on page 12 of the CAFR is terminology mandated by the Governmental Accounting Standard Board statement. The amount presented as $37.9 million in unrestricted net assets is accurate. Repeat, is accurate. Folks, are you listening? Is accurate. But misleading. Although current accounting practices require the use of the term unrestricted net assets, these funds are in fact designated for specific purposes. Okay? They are an overall financial position indicator and not the amount of current resources available for budgetary purposes. I raise the question, how true is that statement? How true? I remember very clearly 6 months ago, Steve Conway, our business manager, are you listening, Mr. Larson? Steve Conway said the town, you know, the net asset portfolio was $65 million, I think, or $70 million at that time. But of that amount, $14.5 million are discretionary. Quote, Mr. Conway, okay, are discretionary. Of course, the town council, who regularly poor-mouth, said, oh, we can't have the truth. We can't have a statement like that, Mr. Conway. You've got to change your description. And lo and behold, like magic, he did, because his bosses told him not to tell the people the truth. So what I'm telling you, the discretionary assets evidently vary somewhere between $14.5 million, as Mr. Conway, to $37.5 million as per the CAFR. So I want the people of this community to understand what is going on down here. The gamesmanship, the wordsmanship that is played back and forth between the council and the employees is unbelievable, deceitful, and intellectually dishonest. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, do you have any response from staff? Thank you.
Not a response. I just wanted to clarify some information for the mayor and council. First, the $14 million fund balance that the finance director referenced before was general fund, while what's presented in the CAFR is all funds of the town, which include much more than the general fund, and most of those other funds are restricted to additional issues. And we had referenced earlier in the public comment, page 12. If you turn to page 14, there is a detailed listing of all the unreserved, designated and undesignated funds, which constitute the preponderance of the net assets that were referenced in the public discussion. Those are further described on page 41, where each of those funds and their intended use based on past council action is specified for such things as vacation accruals for capital projects that are in construction or already planned for construction, and a variety of other uses. So just yet again, staff wanted to clarify the point that the accounting terms, particularly in regard to net assets, do not comply discretionary funds that can be directed at council determination for other uses. And I turn to Steve if there's any other comments overall on the CAFR.
No other comments except once again reiterate what the manager said, that the unrestricted net assets are all funds
A big portion of that, $37 million, for instance, is $10 million in our internal service funds, which we've already, in our treasurer's report on treasurer's balances, have explained that those are monies set aside for equipment replacement, that sort of thing. They are technically unrestricted net assets according to the Governmental Accounting Standards Boards, but our best business practices are monies that we have set aside for these designated purposes. So I don't believe that we've been very forthcoming in how we've described those funds.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Mr. Glickman.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. We received actually two documents. One is the CAFR. It says how much money we've got. The other was a report from our auditing firm, and I wanted to just take the opportunity to touch on the very good job that our staff has done in addressing some internal auditing issues that the auditors identified. I want to make a point of this because recently there was some difficulty in another agency in town concerning exactly these kind of internal practices. And I just wanted to point out that as the issues were identified, in both cases, action has been taken to mitigate, rectify, and fix them. There was an issue of an excess surplus, and there was an issue of purchasing policy, which was not amended, but improved by use of I'm looking for the term here, positive pay system. And since this is probably, I know the hour is late, but a little bit of financial unfamiliar terms to some people, I just wanted to give Mr. Conway an opportunity to point out how that works and how we have addressed and very effectively addressed the issues that our auditors identified.
Thank you, Councilmember Glickman. The positive pay internal control feature that we've implemented with our new Penimation system was suggested a year or two by our auditors. We wanted to wait until we had the new system up and running because what it involves are there two factors. One is safety check stock that is virtually, well, it's highly unlikely that it can be reproduced by criminals. There is some bank fraud that occurs when people get a hold of company or city check stock and use the color copiers to fraudulently create accounts payable checks. Our paper stock that we're using now with our new accounts payable system has a watermark in it that's very difficult to copy on any kind of color copier. So the auditors are very pleased that we've implemented that, and that stock is being issued and mailed as we speak. So that was a huge improvement for us, and we feel much more secure about our check stock. And regarding our positive pay, that also is a feature where our checks, all payroll and accounts payable checks that are paid by the town to our vendors, employees, the bank also receives a data file, and when those checks are endorsed or cashed, there is a file that is linked with our file, and the bank can then verify that the check was indeed authorized by the town, and before it's cashed, it matches check number with the amount and confirms and verifies that and lets the check clear. So once again, another safety feature that we've implemented.
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to thank Mr. Conway for that. Maybe it's more of a technical description than most people are interested in, but it doesn't matter until it matters. Right. And we thank you for enlightening us and the public.
You're most welcome.
Thank you both. Other questions of staff? All right, may I have a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to accept the 2006-07 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and Management Letter.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Przinski, seconded by Mr. Wasserman to accept the report. Discussion, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Agenda item 4, pulled from the consent calendar by Citizen Ray.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Unfortunately, I'm here again to criticize the performance of the administrative clerk relative to the minutes, okay? As you know, this is nothing new. And I'll give you what I believe to be an appropriate correction of the minutes, okay? The clerk wrote that I, at the last meeting, commented that the town treasury grew by $4 million in the last 4 months. Excuse me, it was 1 month. $4 million in 1 month from the end of November to the end of December, okay? I hope that's not too blustery for you, Mr. Wasserman. So that's a major correction, okay? Then we go to the page 7. Says, Mr. Davis stated that the neighboring cement factory is the second major emitter of carbon dioxide in the Bay Area. Now, this cement factory, of course, as I identified, was the old Kaiser Permanente. It's now called Hansen Permanente. And a recent article in the Mercury News, front page article, showed that the cement plant is I think the 9th emitter of carbon dioxide in the Bay Area. 9th biggest. The other 8 are, guess what? Refineries. This cement plant is the first huge emitter, something like over 1 million cubic yards of CO2 every year dumped into our South Bay environment. Can you believe it? And I just found out from Saratoga that this company is now owned by Germans. What does a German businessman give a damn about what we breathe in Los Gatos? I tell you, nothing. So we have to take action as we are doing to evaluate the CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. So I want the minutes corrected to that effect, okay? Then we go on. I complained about the fact that I had an appeal in. I put up $300 to bring the Planning Commission issue to the council. And then we've got Lortz over here, the Director of Community Overdevelopment. He has the city attorney send me a letter saying, I can't.
Thank you.
I can't have an appeal because I wouldn't put up $500. And I said that the normal minutes for the Planning Commission were totally acceptable and appropriate.
Thank you.
Okay?
All right, do we have a motion? We have public hearing is closed. Mr. Brzezinski.
Yes, I'd like to make that motion, but I'd just like to clarify. First of all, I think if Mr. Davis makes an error in his statements in a previous meeting and it's reflected in the minutes and then attempts to correct it afterwards, the minutes should reflect the error that he made, because that's what it's attempting to talk to, is the statements made and not try to verify the truth. I'm going to move that the minutes be approved for February 19th.
Motion by Mr. Brzezinski, seconded by Ms. McNutt to approve the minutes. Discussion, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We are now at council matters. Mr. Glickman.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Just want to briefly touch on an issue that I raised during the last council matters, which is not one I intend to harp on, but I did want to touch on it because I think it's very important. We have a very, very major project coming up, which is the first phase of the Civic Center Master Plan, which is the new library. And while I'm in favor of it, and I keep reiterating that because people think that I'm not, I am concerned, and I repeat my concern, that we are moving ahead with it without the kind of voter approval that was sought recently in the ballot measure, in fact, Mr. Davis referred to. And my thought was this, that a number of years ago, when we did a statistical survey of what the people thought, they thought a skate park was a great idea. And then when they looked at the cost, they voted against it. We did a similar survey regarding the master plan. It was a statistical survey, and we got some support for the library. But in light of the recent election, in light of the public's and the voting public's expressed concern about $1 million or less than $1 million project, before moving forward with this, it would be this councilman's desire to get some public affirmation for spending what I believe is $20 million. And I did take the trouble to look up the staff report, and very, very briefly, would cost about $17.8 million exclusive of parking, furniture, fixtures, equipment, demolition, site improvement costs, and contingency. I think at the end of the day, that's $20 million. Now, that may be a great project, but the other issue of concern is that, as was pointed out by Les White when he did the presentation, there's approximately $4.3 million left in reserves, and since the bulk of this money would be coming from our RDA capacity, the staff report says that as a result, the availability for new data for other infrastructure improvements would be substantially limited. Now, we were talking about recreational facilities, youth issues, senior issues, but if we're going to spend kind of pretty much everything we have on this project, those other issues are going to be hard put to fund. So, again, I'm not opposed to it, but I really do believe that before we move forward, we should be doing what the other communities in our region who are proposing new libraries have done, which is they bond for them to give the voters an opportunity to say if that's how they want their money to be spent, which is what we just did with Measure D. So I hope that the council will support that outreach effort. As an individual council member, I'm going to try to get some public input on how folks feel about this. And if the majority says, yeah, this is how we want our money spent, great, then I'm for it. If they say something otherwise, then I think we all have to stop and think. Thank you very much.
Anything else on council matters? Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you. I just want to respond to a couple of items that were just mentioned.
Well, hold on. Are you going to be speaking about the library?
Yes.
All right. The reason I'm going to look, I have discussed with council, with Mr. Corr before. Let me give you my understanding of council matters, and I don't mean to cut you short, Mr. Wasserman, exactly. It's just that in order to comply with the Brown Act, whenever we have something that we discuss in public, it has to be something that's noticed. And at council matters are normally for announcements to the rest of the council of a meeting we've gone to or something to that effect. It's not totally inappropriate to be a subject matter such as the library, but on the other hand, if we start discussing it, then we get into a slippery slope on the Brown Act. That being said, that's my take. Mr. Korb?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, good. I say it shorter, though. So, that being said, Mr. Wasserman.
May I ask something of you or Mr. Korb, whoever is appropriate to ask the question?
Mr. Korb.
To Mr. Korb, through the mayor. If in council matters a statement is made about a bond measure and we're not discussing a bond measure, is there an opportunity to express a different opinion than the opinion that has been expressed?
Well, the question is, do you want to place the matter on a future agenda for discussion? That's how a discussion occurs.
Yeah.
So one point is brought up and then nothing else can be said under our current policy.
The Brown Act says that you can ask short questions, but you really shouldn't engage in discussion on matters that are not on the agenda. When one person makes a comment, another person wants to respond to the comment, another person wants to respond to the response, you have a discussion. So my best advice is don't do that. But if you want to have a discussion, place it on a future agenda.
Okay, and just to finish, if I may, Madam Mayor, a statement is considered a discussion when it's in response to another statement?
Yes.
I think by most definitions it would be, yes.
Then I'm done.
Anything else on council matters? All right, seeing none. Manager matters.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, two quick items, especially given the hour. First, you may have seen and residents may see a couple of Segways being driven around the streets of Los Gatos by our police officers. Two Segways have been loaned to the town at no cost for trial use for 9 days. We have officers that have been trained, and they're really our bicycle unit that are using the Segways simply as a testing opportunity, and we would be returning to the council for any policy discussion on the use of those Segways on trails, should that ever be allowed. We already have had that discussion, and that in light of the current fiscal situation of the town and most cities throughout California, if the town were to pursue use of Segways for law enforcement purposes, it would be not at town expense in terms of the equipment, operation, purchase, and maintenance of the equipment. Second, but people will see them. I saw them tonight as I was driving to the council meeting from dinner, and an officer engaged with a couple on the street downtown, obviously having a good talk about how wonderful downtown is. So, second item that was brought up earlier that I just want to respond to is that it is my direction, as it was my predecessors, that all staff reports, investigations, and analysis should come to council with recommendations unless precluded legally from doing so. We will continue that practice until advised otherwise or requested otherwise by the council. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and we are adjourned.